In this video, we'll be breaking down 2 hours of Rick and Morty multiverse lore to fall asleep to. Let's get started. First up, we got the infinite multiverse, the foundation holding Rick and Morty together. The idea that there are endless versions of everything in existence sits at the very heart of Rick and Morty. From the very first episode, the show makes it clear that reality is bigger than anyone imagined. There are countless universes out there, each one running parallel to the next, and in each universe, different versions of the same people are living completely different lives. The pilot episode wastes no time introducing this concept. Rick Sanchez, a genius scientist who can travel anywhere in space and time, drags his teenage grandson Morty out of bed in the middle of the night. Rick is drunk, stumbling around, and he tells Morty he has a surprise. They get into a flying vehicle that Rick built from parts in the garage, and Rick reveals his plan to destroy Earth with a neutrino bomb. He wants to wipe out humanity and start fresh, with Morty and a girl named Jessica as the new Adam and Eve. Morty freaks out and grabs the wheel, forcing Rick to land the ship in a desert. Rick passes out and claims it was all a test to make Morty more assertive, but the bomb is still armed and beeping. The next morning, Morty is exhausted at breakfast. His parents, Jerry and Beth, notice something is wrong. They think Rick is a bad influence on Morty, and they consider putting Rick in a nursing home. But Rick needs Morty for an adventure, so he pulls him out of school. They travel through a portal to another dimension, a place Rick calls Dimension 35C. This dimension has the perfect conditions for growing mega trees, which produce mega fruit that contains mega seeds. Rick needs these seeds for his research. The mega seeds are incredibly valuable, and getting them past intergalactic customs is a problem. Rick tells Morty to hide the seeds in his rectum to smuggle them through. The plan works until their cover is blown, and Rick and Morty have to escape while shooting at bureaucratic alien insects. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jerry and Beth discover that Morty has missed almost an entire semester of school. He attended only 7 hours of class over 2 months. They decide to move Rick to a nursing home because he is ruining their son's education. When Rick and Morty return home with the seeds still hidden in Morty's body, they walk into a family intervention. Jerry and Beth are ready to send Rick away, but then Morty starts talking. The mega seeds dissolving inside him have made him incredibly intelligent, temporarily giving him knowledge far beyond what a normal teenager should have. Morty explains complex concepts about Rick's portal technology and the value of their adventures. Jerry and Beth are impressed. They think Morty is becoming smarter because of Rick, so they change their minds about the nursing home. Rick reveals the truth once Jerry and Beth leave. The intelligence was just a side effect of the seeds, and it will wear off soon. Morty starts writhing on the floor as the seeds lose their effect. Rick tells him they need to go back and get more seeds. Then he goes on a rambling speech about all the adventures they will have together, promising they will run around forever across infinite realities. This first episode establishes that Rick can travel to other dimensions whenever he wants. Dimension 35C exists separately from the dimension where the Smith family lives, and Rick treats interdimensional travel like driving to the store. The universe is not limited to one reality. There are other dimensions out there with different rules, different life forms, and different versions of Earth. The concept gets much darker in the 6th episode, titled Rick Potion No. Porn 9. Morty has a crush on a girl at his school named Jessica. A flu season dance is coming up, and Morty desperately wants Jessica to notice him. He asks his father Jerry for advice, but Rick overhears and mocks Jerry's failing marriage. Rick tells Morty that love is just a chemical reaction that makes animals breed, and once that wears off, people are left miserable. Despite his cynicism, Morty convinces Rick to make a love potion. Rick creates a serum using DNA from voles, which are rodents that mate for life. He mixes it with a sample of Morty's hair and gives it to him in a small container. Rick warns Morty that the potion is foolproof unless the person has the flu. Morty goes to the dance and pretends to trip, spilling the potion on Jessica's arm. The potion works instantly. Jessica becomes obsessed with Morty, telling him she loves him so much it burns. But then she sneezes. Jessica has the flu. The love serum combines with the flu virus and becomes airborne. Jessica sneezes infected particles into the mouth of Brad, a student who was trying to intimidate Morty. Brad immediately falls in love with Morty. Then Brad sneezes into the ventilation system and the punch bowl. Within minutes, everyone at the dance is infected. They all want Morty. The virus spreads across the entire planet through the flu, and soon the whole world is chasing Morty, desperate to mate with him. Rick realizes what happened and tries to fix it. He creates an antidote using DNA from praying mantises, thinking that mantis behavior will counteract the love potion. The antidote does stop people from loving Morty, but it also turns them into human-mantis hybrids. Rick tries again, mixing together DNA from multiple animals to reverse the mutations. This third serum stops the mantis transformation, but it creates something worse. Everyone on Earth except the Smith family mutates into grotesque, barely humanoid creatures. Morty blames Rick for destroying the world. Rick calls the monsters Cronenbergs, after the director David Cronenberg, who is famous for body horror films. Rick decides the situation cannot be fixed. Instead of trying to repair the damage, he scans infinite realities to find a dimension where another version of himself solved the problem. He finds one. In that reality, Rick and Morty created a cure and saved the world, but then they died in an explosion shortly after. Rick opens a portal to this new dimension, which he identifies as Dimension C-131. He and Morty step through the portal and see their alternate selves lying dead in the garage. They drag the bodies outside and bury them in the backyard. Then they walk back into the house and sit down for dinner with this dimension's version of Beth, Jerry, and Summer. Nobody notices the switch. This episode reveals that there are infinite versions of Rick and Morty across infinite dimensions. When one reality becomes unlivable, Rick can simply move to another reality where everything is almost exactly the same. The original dimension, the one where the Smith family got left behind with a planet full of Cronenberg monsters, still exists. Beth, Jerry, and Summer from that dimension are shown in the end credits living in an armored van, roasting a dead Cronenberg over a fire. They admit they do not miss Rick and Morty at all. Despite the apocalypse, they have found happiness as a family. Meanwhile, two other versions of Rick and Morty arrive in the Cronenberg dimension through a portal. This Cronenberg Rick accidentally turned everyone in his dimension into normal humans, and he is looking for a reality where everyone is already Cronenberg monsters. The multiverse does not just contain infinite Earths, it contains infinite versions of every possible outcome. The 10th episode, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, expands the multiverse even further by introducing organized societies of Ricks. The episode opens with a version of the Smith family eating breakfast together. This is not the same family the audience has been following, though that fact is not immediately clear. Beth mentions it is Rick's one-year anniversary of moving back in with them, and she plans to make flying saucer-shaped pancakes. Suddenly, a portal opens in the wall. Another Rick and another Morty step through, carrying weapons. This other Rick shoots the family's Rick in the head, killing him instantly. The other Morty tranquilizes the family's Morty and drags him through the portal. The attackers vanish. The scene cuts to the dimension the audience knows, where Rick and Morty are sitting down for breakfast with their family. Portals open all around the room, and multiple Ricks in military uniforms emerge with guns. They announce that Rick Sanchez of Earth Dimension C-137 is under arrest for crimes against alternate Ricks. Rick and Morty are taken through a portal to a massive structure floating in space. This is the Citadel of Ricks, an interdimensional sanctuary where Ricks and Mortys from different timelines have gathered to form a society. Morty is amazed at first, seeing hundreds of Ricks and Mortys walking around, but he quickly realizes that Mortys are treated as second-class citizens. The Ricks view Mortys as disposable tools. Rick C-137 is brought before the Transdimensional Council of Ricks, a governing body made up of powerful Ricks from various dimensions. The council accuses Rick C-137 of murdering 27 Ricks from alternate dimensions and kidnapping their Mortys. They have evidence showing that Rick C-137's portal gun was used in the attacks. Rick insists he was framed, but the council does not believe him. They sentence him to the machine of unspeakable doom. Rick and Morty escape before the execution can happen. They are chased through multiple dimensions by soldier Ricks, who look exactly like them. Rick hacks into his portal gun and traces the signal of whoever remotely controlled it to frame him. The signal leads them to a hidden base in a remote dimension. As they approach, Morty sees something horrifying. The entire exterior of the building is covered with Mortys. Hundreds of naked Mortys are strapped to the walls, tortured by machines that constantly stab them. Rick explains that Ricks have distinct, traceable brainwaves because of their genius. The best way to hide from another Rick is to stand near a Morty, because Morty's brainwaves cancel out Rick's. One Morty is enough to hide from the authorities, but a whole array of Mortys in agonizing pain creates a pattern that can hide even from other Ricks. Morty is devastated. He thought his relationship with Rick was special, but now he realizes he is just a human cloaking device. Inside the base, they find the Rick who framed Rick C-137. This Rick is called Evil Rick, and he is more cold and calculating than most Ricks. He has created a lab where he tortures Mortys to hide his presence. Evil Rick captures Rick C-137 and Morty C-137. He straps Rick to a table and begins downloading his brain. He locks Morty in a room with dozens of terrified Mortys who have been kidnapped from other dimensions. Morty leads the captured Mortys in a rebellion. They overpower Evil Rick's defenses and free Rick C-137. Morty bitterly tells Rick that if he were a Rick, he would not have helped. Rick and Morty report Evil Rick's location to the Council of Ricks, clearing Rick C-137's name. But then the council discovers something unexpected. Evil Rick was not in control. He was being mind-controlled by someone else. The reveal comes in the final moments. Evil Rick's Morty, who had been wearing an eye patch, destroys the device and walks away into the crowd of Mortys. The council does not realize what has happened. The audience sees that a Morty was the true mastermind behind everything. This Morty, who would later be called Evil Morty, orchestrated the murder of 27 Ricks and the kidnapping of their Mortys. The show makes it clear that in infinite realities, there are not just infinite Ricks, there are also infinite Mortys, and some of them are just as dangerous as Rick. The Citadel of Ricks proves that the multiverse is vast enough to support entire civilizations of alternate versions. Ricks from countless dimensions have come together to create a government, an economy, and a society. The Citadel operates outside any single dimension, existing as a hub for interdimensional travelers. Mortys are traded, bought, and sold. Some Ricks are kind, like Doofus Rick, who befriends Jerry during the episode. Other Ricks are cruel and view Mortys as nothing more than tools. The existence of the Citadel means that infinite Ricks have encountered each other, compared notes, and organized. The multiverse is not just theoretical. It is a lived reality for thousands of versions of the same people. The 8th episode, Rixty Minutes, takes the concept of infinite realities and makes it playful. The Smith family is sitting around the television, watching a reality show where a man is choosing between two women. Rick is disgusted by the low quality of modern television. Jerry challenges Rick to show them something better. Rick tears apart the cable box and replaces it with his own invention, a device that can receive television programming from infinite dimensions. Rick flips through the channels, showing the family a wild variety of shows. There is a crime drama from a dimension where humans evolved from corn. There is a commercial for fake doors that do not open. There is a movie about a man who eats feces. The shows are absurd, improvised, and endless. Rick explains that this is infinite TV from infinite realities, meaning every possible version of every possible show exists somewhere. Jerry becomes obsessed when he sees a commercial featuring himself. In another dimension, Jerry is a famous actor starring in big-budget Hollywood films. Rick gives Jerry, Beth, and Summer a pair of goggles that let them see their alternate selves in other dimensions. They watch as alternate versions of themselves live completely different lives. Jerry is a movie star. Beth is a successful surgeon who never married Jerry. Summer learns something devastating. In the dimension where Beth and Jerry never got married, Summer was never born. She was an accident, a mistake that only happened because her parents got together too young. The revelation sends Summer into a spiral of despair. While the family obsesses over their alternate selves, Rick and Morty continue watching interdimensional cable. They see commercials for products that make no sense, talk shows hosted by bizarre creatures, and news broadcasts from realities where the laws of physics work differently. The episode drives home the core message of the show. Infinite realities means infinite possibilities. Every choice creates a branch where a different version of that choice was made. Every person exists in countless forms across countless dimensions, living countless lives. The multiverse is not a tool Rick uses to escape consequences. It is the fundamental structure of reality in Rick and Morty. From the pilot episode onward, The show establishes that nothing is unique. Every person, every moment, and every decision exists in infinite variations. Rick can hop between dimensions because the barriers between realities are thin, and with the right technology, they can be crossed. The existence of the Citadel proves that Ricks across infinite timelines have figured this out and come together. The love potion disaster shows that when one reality breaks beyond repair, another reality is always waiting. This infinite multiverse is the foundation everything else is built on. It allows Rick to act without caring about consequences, because there are always more versions of everyone. It gives the show freedom to explore wild scenarios, because anything that can happen does happen somewhere. It creates a sense of existential dread, because it means nothing anyone does truly matters. There are infinite versions of every moment, infinite copies of every person, and infinite outcomes of every choice. Rick and Morty does not just acknowledge the multiverse, it makes the multiverse the core of its identity. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Dimension C 137, the universe where Rick was born and the place where he lost his original family. Dimension C 137, Rick's birth universe and family loss. The identity of Dimension C 137 carries weight in Rick and Morty beyond just being a label. This is the universe where Rick Sanchez was born. This is where his family lived. And this is where he lost everything that ever mattered to him. The show kept the truth about this dimension hidden for years, letting viewers wonder if Rick's tragic backstory was real or just another one of his lies. 3 episodes finally revealed the answer, and the reality turned out to be darker than anyone expected. The first glimpse of Rick's past came in the Season 3 premiere, an episode called The Rickshank Rickdemption. Rick is trapped in a Galactic Federation prison, and a Federation agent named Cornelius Daniel connects to Rick's brain through a device called a brainalyzer. The agent wants to access Rick's memories and steal the formula for his portal gun. Rick takes control of the simulation and leads the agent through what he claims is the memory of how he invented interdimensional travel. The memory shows Rick living a normal life with his wife Diane and his young daughter Beth. They are in their garage, and Rick is working at a workbench. He is wearing blue pants instead of his usual brown ones. Suddenly, a portal opens in the garage, and another version of Rick steps through. This other Rick tells him about the multiverse and offers him the formula for portal travel. He says Rick could do anything he wants, travel anywhere, and become the smartest man in every universe. He calls this version of Rick the Infinite Rick, a god among men. Rick refuses the offer. He tells the other Rick that he is a different kind of Rick. He does not want infinite power or endless adventures. He wants to stay with his family. The other Rick looks disappointed and says they will see how long that lasts. Then he steps back through the portal and vanishes. Rick turns to Diane and tells her he took a long look at himself and decided the science thing is not going to pay off. Diane suggests they go get ice cream with Beth. Rick agrees and says that is the last great idea that will ever be had in this garage. But before they can leave, a bomb drops through a portal from above. It detonates instantly. The explosion kills Diane and Beth. Rick survives, standing in the burning ruins of his garage, surrounded by fire and debris. The memory shows him devastated, staring at the destruction. Then it cuts forward in time. Rick is alone, living in squalor. His house is a mess, and he looks broken. Eventually, he returns to his workbench. He writes down 3 lines of math on a piece of paper. This is the formula for the portal gun, the same technology the other Rick tried to give him. Rick has figured it out on his own. He holds up the portal gun and activates it, opening a green swirling portal. After this memory plays out, Rick reveals to the Federation agent that the entire thing was fake. He calls it a totally fabricated origin story, something he made up to trick the brainalyzer. Rick says he is not driven by avenging his dead family. He claims his real motivation is finding a specific dipping sauce from McDonald's that was discontinued years ago. The agent believes Rick, and the audience is left wondering if any of the backstory was real or if Rick invented all of it as part of his escape plan. For years, the show left this question unanswered. Rick's past remained a mystery. Then the Season 5 finale, an episode called Rick Mirai Jack, confirmed the truth. The backstory was real. Diane and Beth were killed. Rick did lose his family, and everything that came after was shaped by that loss. The episode shows Rick living as an anime protagonist with two crows as his companions. Morty tries to reconnect with him, but Rick is distant. Eventually, Rick returns to the family, and he and Morty visit the Citadel of Ricks. There, they encounter Evil Morty, who has become the president of the Citadel. Evil Morty reveals that he plans to escape the central finite curve, a barrier that Rick's built around infinity. The finite curve separates all the infinite universes, where Rick is the smartest man in the universe, from all the other infinite universes where he is not. Every version of Rick and Morty has lived their entire lives inside this wall, trapped in what Evil Morty calls an infinite crib built around an infinite baby. Evil Morty destroys the Citadel and escapes through the curve. As the Citadel collapses, Morty confronts Rick about all the secrets he has been keeping. Rick offers to show Morty his backstory, the real story of what happened. The show presents this as a montage, narrated by Rick, showing the events that followed the death of Diane and Beth. After his family was killed, Rick was alone. The montage shows him sitting in his empty house, looking lost and broken. Eventually, he finishes inventing the portal gun. Once he has the technology to travel between dimensions, Rick begins searching for the Rick who murdered his wife and daughter. He hops from universe to universe, looking for his target. During this time, he meets Birdperson, who becomes his closest friend. The two of them fight together in a rebellion against the Gromflamites, a species that controls large parts of the galaxy. But Rick's main goal never changes. He is hunting for the Rick who killed his family. He starts killing other Ricks, hoping one of them will lead him to his target, or that he will eventually find the right one. Rick travels through countless dimensions, murdering alternate versions of himself in his search. He becomes bitter, violent, and alcoholic. The montage shows him as a lonely, depressed old man, drifting through the multiverse with no purpose except revenge. His killing spree has consequences. Other Ricks, tired of being hunted, band together to protect themselves. They form the Council of Ricks and build the Citadel as a sanctuary. Rick C-137, the Rick the audience has been following, helps them construct the Citadel. But he never finds the Rick he is looking for. After years of searching, Rick gives up. He accepts that he will never catch his family's killer. Instead, he settles down in another dimension where a version of Beth is still alive. He moves in with her family and becomes the grandfather of Morty Smith. This backstory explains why Rick is the way he is. He is not naturally cruel or nihilistic. He became that way after losing everything. His constant drinking, his refusal to care about consequences, his insistence that nothing matters, all of it stems from the trauma of watching his wife and daughter die. Rick's whole personality is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid feeling the pain of what he lost. The Season 6 premiere, an episode called Solarix, adds more details to the story. After the destruction of the Citadel, Rick and Morty are stranded in space. They are eventually rescued by Space Beth and brought home. Rick tries to fix his portal gun by resetting the portal fluid, but he makes a mistake. Instead of resetting portal travel, he resets portal travelers. A green pulse spreads across the universe, and everyone who has ever used a portal is sent back to their original dimension. Rick, Morty, and Jerry all start glowing green. Summer realizes what is happening and tries to help them, but before she can, they vanish. Rick is sent to Dimension C-137, his original home. Morty is sent to the Cronenberg dimension, the reality he and Rick abandoned after turning everyone into monsters with the love potion. Jerry is sent to his original dimension, a reality where he was accidentally swapped at a facility called the Jerry Baree. When Rick arrives in Dimension C-137, he finds his old house. Everything looks the same as it did decades ago. He walks through the rooms, gathering materials he needs. As he works, he talks to D-I-A-N-E, an artificial intelligence he created based on his dead wife. The AI speaks with Diane's voice and personality. Rick programmed her to haunt him, to remind him of what he lost. D-I-A-N-E asks if Rick has found their daughter's killer yet. Rick says no, he is still looking. She tells him he will find the killer eventually because Rick always does everything he sets his mind to, except keep his family alive. Then she adds that their daughter's death was hardly his fault. Rick tells her to mute. The AI keeps talking. She says if she could be muted, she would not be very good at haunting him. Rick admits he forgot he wanted to be haunted. As he explores the house, Diane mentions she kept up the search for the killer while Rick was gone. She tells him she has been monitoring all the dimensions, waiting for the right Rick to appear. Rick walks through the neighborhood and sees something disturbing. The entire dimension is frozen in time. People are walking through the same motions over and over, stuck in a loop. But they are also aging. Years have passed, and everyone looks decades older. Rick realizes what he did. When he left Dimension C-137, he froze time to preserve it, hoping that one day he could find Diane's killer, bring him back here, and get revenge. But Rick forgot that freezing time does not stop people from aging. The residents of C-137 have been living the same day for years, growing old while trapped in an endless repetition. Rick decides he has held on to his need for revenge for too long. He tells Diane that he is going to move on. He has a family now, a different version of Beth and her children, and he cares about them. He is ready to let go of the past and settle in with the people who matter to him in the present. As Rick prepares to leave through a portal created by Summer, Diane speaks up. She tells Rick that the portal reset he caused would have sent the killer back to his original dimension as well. If Rick has been looking for him all these years, this might be his chance. Meanwhile, Morty arrives in the Cronenberg dimension, the world he and Rick abandoned after the love potion disaster. The Earth is overgrown with plants, and the Cronenberg creatures are scattered and dying. Morty finds his original father, Jerry, living alone in the ruins. This Jerry has become hardened and nihilistic. His wife Beth and his daughter Summer died after Rick and Morty left. Jerry survived on his own, adopting a philosophy similar to Rick's. He tells Morty that his mom and sister are dead, and he moved on from caring. He says that is the best deal Morty will ever get, so he should take it. Morty tries to explain that Batman does not abandon his allies, but Jerry points out that Morty abandoned his original family. Morty has no response. Rick arrives to pick up Morty. He tells Morty something important. This dimension, the Cronenberg world, is not just Morty's original home. It is also the home dimension of Rick Prime, the Rick who killed Diane and Beth. Rick reveals that he moved in with this version of the Smith family specifically because it was Rick Prime's family. Rick was hoping that if he stayed here long enough, Rick Prime would eventually return, and Rick could finally get his revenge. This revelation reframes everything the audience knows. The dimension where the show takes place, the reality that became the Cronenberg world, is Rick Prime's dimension. Rick C-137 settled there decades ago, waiting for his family's killer to come back. He bonded with this version of Beth, watched her grow up, and became the grandfather of her son Morty. But his original motivation was revenge. Rick and Morty break into Rick Prime's hidden base. Inside, they find either Rick Prime or a clone of him suspended in a tube. Recordings of Rick Prime's voice play, mocking Rick C-137 for his obsession. Rick wants to attack immediately, driven by his need for vengeance, but Morty stops him. Morty reminds Rick that they have a family waiting for them in another dimension, people who care about them. Rick does not need to throw away everything for revenge. Rick hesitates, then agrees. He and Morty leave the base without destroying Rick Prime. Dimension C-137 is the universe where Rick's story began, and where his original family died. It is the place he abandoned, but never forgot. The show spent years hiding the truth about Rick's past, letting viewers wonder if his tragic backstory was real or just another manipulation. The answer turned out to be both. Rick did lose Diane and Beth. He did invent the portal gun to hunt for their killer, but he also uses that story as a tool, a weapon, and an excuse. He lies about it when it serves him, and he hides behind it when he does not want to face his feelings. Rick has spent decades running from the pain of his loss, traveling through infinite realities, trying to either find his family's killer or forget they ever existed. He failed at both. The past follows him everywhere. His daughter is alive in other dimensions, but she is not his daughter. His grandson loves him, but Rick still sees Morty as part of Rick Prime's family, not his own. Every relationship Rick has is built on a foundation of lies and grief. He moved in with the Smith family hoping to trap Rick Prime, but along the way, he started to care about them. Now he is stuck between two versions of himself: the broken man who lost everything and the scientist who pretends nothing matters. Dimension C-137 represents everything Rick has tried to leave behind. It is the proof that he was not always this way. He had a life, a wife, a daughter. He could have been happy. But someone took that away from him, and Rick has never recovered. The frozen neighborhood, the aging residents trapped in a time loop, the AI version of his dead wife programmed to haunt him. All of it shows that Rick cannot let go. He keeps the past alive even as it destroys him. The multiverse is infinite, and there are countless versions of everyone. But Dimension C-137 is the only place where Rick's original family lived. It is the only universe where Diane and Beth were his, not copies or alternatives. When Rick left that dimension, he left behind the last piece of his true self. Everything that came after has been a lie, a performance, a desperate attempt to keep moving so the pain does not catch up. Rick C-137 is not the Rick from the dimension where the show takes place. He is an outsider, a refugee from a dead world, living in someone else's life, and no matter how far he travels or how many realities he visits, he will never escape the fact that his real family is gone. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Prime Dimension, the first portal gun, and the Cronenberg disaster. The Prime Dimension, the first portal gun, and the Cronenberg disaster. The Prime Dimension holds a unique place in Rick and Morty because it is where nearly everything in the show happens. This is the universe where Morty Smith grew up. This is the reality where Rick Sanchez moved in with his daughter Beth and her family. And this is the dimension that became a nightmare world filled with mutated monsters after a love potion went horribly wrong. But the Prime Dimension's significance goes deeper than just being the setting for the show. It is the home universe of Rick Prime, the first Rick to ever invent portal travel and the man who destroyed Rick C-137's life. Rick Prime is not the Rick the audience follows. The main Rick in the show is Rick C-137, the Rick from Dimension C-137, where his wife Diane and daughter Beth were killed. Rick Prime is a different person entirely, a version of Rick who invented the portal gun and decided that exploring the infinite multiverse was more important than staying with his family. He abandoned his wife Diane, his daughter Beth, and eventually his grandson Morty to travel between dimensions. Along the way, he visited other versions of himself and offered them the technology for portal travel. In the episode, The Rickshank Rickdemption, Rick C-137 shows a memory of when Rick Prime first appeared in his life. Rick C-137 was working in his garage when a portal opened and another Rick stepped through. This was Rick Prime. He was wearing a purplish jacket with a gray shoulder pad, different from the blue shirt and brown pants that most Ricks wear. Rick Prime held a portal gun and told Rick C-137 about the infinite multiverse. He explained that with portal technology, Rick could travel anywhere, do anything, and become the smartest man in every conceivable universe. He called this version of Rick the Infinite Rick, a god. Rick C-137 refused. He told Rick Prime he was a different kind of Rick. He did not want to abandon his family or explore the multiverse. He wanted to stay home with Diane and Beth. Rick Prime was surprised and insulted. He asked who Rick C-137 thought he was, turning down an offer like this. Then he left through the portal. Moments later, a bomb dropped from above. The explosion killed Diane and Beth instantly, leaving Rick C-137 standing in the ruins of his garage. This memory was initially presented as fake. Rick C-137 told the Federation agent interrogating him that the entire backstory was fabricated, something he made up to manipulate the Brainalyzer. But in the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, the show confirmed the memory was real. Rick Prime did visit Rick C-137. He did offer the portal gun technology, and when Rick C-137 refused, Rick Prime murdered his family out of spite. After the bombing, Rick C-137 grieved. Then he decided to invent the portal gun himself. He became the only Rick in the multiverse besides Rick Prime to independently create interdimensional travel technology. Every other Rick who has a portal gun received the formula from Rick Prime. Only Rick C-137 figured it out on his own, driven by the need to hunt down his family's killer. Once Rick C-137 had his portal gun working, he began traveling through dimensions, searching for Rick Prime. He met Bird Person and fought in the rebellion against the Gromflamites. He killed countless alternate Ricks, hoping to find the one who destroyed his life. Eventually, the other Ricks banded together and formed the Council of Ricks to stop him. But Rick C-137 never found Rick Prime. After years of searching, he gave up. He learned that Rick Prime had abandoned his family in a specific dimension, so Rick C-137 tracked down that universe and moved in with Rick Prime's family. He hoped that one day Rick Prime would return, and when he did, Rick C-137 would finally get his revenge. The dimension Rick C-137 chose was the Prime Dimension, the universe where the show takes place. When Rick C-137 arrived in the Prime Dimension, Beth was already an adult. She had married Jerry Smith and had 2 children, Summer and Morty. Rick moved into their house, set up a lab in the garage, and waited. He bonded with Morty, took him on adventures, and became part of the family. But his real reason for being there was revenge. He was waiting for Rick Prime to come home. Rick Prime never came back, and while Rick C-137 waited, something went catastrophically wrong. The disaster happened in the 6th episode of Season 1, titled Rick Potion No But 9. Morty had a crush on a girl at school named Jessica. He wanted her to notice him, so he asked Rick to make a love potion. Rick agreed and created a serum using DNA from voles, rodents that mate for life. He combined the vole DNA with a sample of Morty's hair, creating a potion that would make anyone who smelled it fall in love with Morty forever. Morty went to the flu season dance at his school and spilled the potion on Jessica. It worked instantly. Jessica became obsessed with Morty, telling him she loved him so much it burned. But Jessica had the flu. Rick had warned Morty that the potion would not work properly if the target was sick, but Morty did not listen or did not care. The love serum mixed with the flu virus and became airborne. Jessica sneezed infected particles into Brad's mouth. Brad immediately fell in love with Morty. Then Brad sneezed into the ventilation system and the punch bowl. Within minutes, everyone at the dance was infected. The virus spread across the entire planet. Soon, every person on Earth except the Smith family was chasing Morty, desperate to be with him. Rick realized what happened and tried to fix it. He created an antidote using DNA from praying mantises, thinking that mantis mating behavior would counteract the love serum. The antidote worked, but it also turned everyone into human-mantis hybrids. These creatures no longer loved Morty, but they were still mutated. Rick tried again, this time mixing DNA from multiple animals to reverse the transformation. The second cure stopped people from being mantis hybrids, but it created something worse. Everyone on Earth mutated into grotesque, barely humanoid blobs of flesh. Morty was horrified and blamed Rick for destroying the world. Rick called the monsters Cronenbergs, after director David Cronenberg, whose films are famous for body horror. Rick decided the situation could not be fixed. He told Morty they were going to abandon the dimension. Rick scanned the multiverse looking for a reality where another version of himself had solved the Cronenberg problem. He found one. In that dimension, Rick and Morty created a cure that worked, but they died in an explosion shortly after. Rick opened a portal to this new dimension, which he identified as Dimension C-131. He and Morty stepped through and buried the dead bodies of their alternate selves in the backyard. Then they went inside and sat down for dinner with the family, pretending to be the Rick and Morty who had always lived there. Nobody noticed the switch. The Prime Dimension, the universe where Rick C-137 had been living with Morty, became the Cronenberg Dimension. Beth, Jerry, and Summer were left behind with a planet full of mutated monsters. The end credits of Rick Potion No. 9. Show the family living in an armored van, roasting a dead Cronenberg over a fire. Summer creates her own TV shows by standing in a cardboard box. Beth and Jerry admit they do not miss Rick and Morty. Despite the apocalypse, they say they have found happiness together. Meanwhile, 2 other versions of Rick and Morty appear in the Cronenberg dimension through a portal. These are Cronenberg Rick and Cronenberg Morty, a Rick and Morty from a universe where everyone was already Cronenberg monsters. In their home dimension, Cronenberg Rick accidentally turned everyone into normal humans, so they came to this dimension looking for a place where everyone was already mutated. The multiverse is so vast that even the most specific scenarios exist somewhere. For years, the show did not explain why Rick C-137 had settled in this particular dimension. Then the episode, Solarix, revealed the truth. After evil Morty destroyed the Citadel and damaged the portal gun, Rick C-137 tried to fix it by resetting the portal fluid. He made a mistake. Instead of resetting portal travel, he reset portal travelers. A green pulse spread across the universe, and everyone who had ever used a portal was sent back to their original dimension. Rick C-137 was sent to Dimension C-137. Morty was sent to the Cronenberg dimension, his original home. Jerry was sent to his original dimension from before a mix-up at the Jerry Bory. When Morty arrived in the Cronenberg dimension, he found his original father, Jerry. This Jerry was living alone in the ruins of the apocalypse. Beth and Summer had died at some point after Rick and Morty left. Jerry survived by himself, eating Cronenberg creatures and adopting a nihilistic philosophy. He told Morty that his mom and sister were dead and that he had moved on from caring. He said this was the best deal Morty would ever get. Morty tried to connect with Jerry, explaining that Batman does not abandon allies. Jerry pointed out that Morty had abandoned his family. Morty had no response. Rick C-137 came to pick up Morty from the Cronenberg dimension. While they were there, Rick revealed something critical. He told Morty that the Cronenberg dimension was not just Morty's original home, it was also Rick Prime's home dimension. This was the universe Rick Prime abandoned when he left his family to explore the multiverse. Rick C-137 had known this all along. He moved in with Rick Prime's Beth, became the grandfather of Rick Prime's grandson Morty, and lived in Rick Prime's house for years, waiting for Rick Prime to return so he could kill him. This revelation changed everything. The dimension where the show takes place, the universe that became the Cronenberg world, belonged to Rick Prime. Rick C-137 was a stranger, an outsider who inserted himself into someone else's family. Morty was not Rick C-137's grandson. He was Rick Prime's grandson. Summer was Rick Prime's granddaughter. Beth was Rick Prime's daughter. The entire Smith family in the Prime dimension was connected to Rick Prime, not Rick C-137. Rick C-137 had spent years pretending to be their Rick, building relationships with them, but he had only moved in because he wanted revenge on the man who actually belonged there. In Solarix, Rick and Morty broke into Rick Prime's hidden base in the Cronenberg dimension. They found either Rick Prime or a clone of him suspended in a tube. Recordings of Rick Prime's voice played, mocking Rick C-137 for his obsession. Rick wanted to attack, driven by decades of rage and the need for revenge. But Morty stopped him. Morty reminded Rick that they had a family waiting for them, people who cared about them. Rick did not need to throw everything away for revenge. Rick hesitated, then agreed. He and Morty left the base without killing Rick Prime. The Prime dimension is important because it is where two stories collide. It is the universe Rick Prime abandoned, leaving his family behind to explore infinity. And it is the universe Rick C-137 invaded, hoping to trap and kill the man who destroyed his life. The Cronenberg disaster turned the Prime dimension into a hellscape, forcing Rick and Morty to abandon it, just like Rick Prime had decades earlier. Now the dimension sits in ruins, a reminder of what happens when Ricks interfere with worlds that do not belong to them. Rick Prime invented the portal gun first. He was the original creator of interdimensional travel technology. He visited other Ricks and gave them the formula, spreading portal travel across the multiverse. But when Rick C-137 refused to join him, Rick Prime responded with violence. He killed Diane and Beth, setting off a chain of events that would shape Rick C-137 for the rest of his life. Rick C-137 invented his own portal gun, becoming the only other Rick to independently create the technology. He spent years hunting Rick Prime, killing countless alternate Ricks, and eventually helping to form the Citadel. When he could not find his target, he settled in Rick Prime's dimension, hoping the killer would return home. The love potion disaster that turned the Prime dimension into the Cronenberg world happened because Rick C-137 was not paying attention. He gave Morty a dangerous serum without properly explaining the risks. The virus spread, the cures failed, and an entire planet was destroyed. Rick and Morty abandoned the dimension, leaving Beth, Jerry, and Summer behind to survive in the ruins. They moved to Dimension C-131, where another Rick and Morty had just died, and took their place. The Prime Dimension is not just the setting for the show, it is the battleground where Rick C-137's need for revenge intersects with Rick Prime's legacy of abandonment. It is the universe where a family was left behind twice, first by Rick Prime when he chose the multiverse over his wife and children, and second by Rick C-137 when he destroyed the world with a love potion and ran away. The Cronenberg monsters that roam the ruins are a permanent reminder of what happens when Ricks refuse to take responsibility for their actions. Rick Prime is gone, disappeared into the infinite multiverse. Rick C-137 is living in someone else's life, pretending to be a grandfather to children who were never his. The Prime Dimension sits abandoned, a dead world filled with mutated creatures and the ghosts of mistakes that can never be undone. And somewhere out there, Rick Prime is still free, the man who started everything by inventing a gun that opens doorways to infinity. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Central Finite Curve, Rick's self-created multiverse CAG. The Central Finite Curve, Rick's self-created multiverse cage. The Central Finite Curve is one of the darkest secrets in Rick and Morty, and when the truth finally came out, it changed everything the audience thought they knew about the show. For years, viewers assumed Rick could travel anywhere in the infinite multiverse. The portal gun seemed limitless, capable of opening doorways to any reality, but that was a lie. Rick and the other Ricks built a cage around themselves, a barrier separating part of infinity from the rest. They locked themselves and everyone else inside a custom-made prison, and they did it on purpose. The first mention of the Central Finite Curve appeared in the Season 1 episode, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. When Rick C-137 was brought before the Council of Ricks and accused of murdering alternate Ricks, one of the council members told him something specific. The council member said that of all the Ricks in the Central Finite Curve, Rick C-137 was the malcontent, the rogue. The line was quick, easy to miss. It sounded like technical jargon, another piece of sci-fi nonsense in a show filled with made-up terms. But it was real, and it meant something. For years, the show did nothing with this information. The Central Finite Curve was mentioned once and then forgotten. Fans speculated about what it could mean, but the show moved on to other stories. Then, in the Season 5 finale, an episode called Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty revealed the truth. And the truth was worse than anyone expected. Evil Morty had been working toward a single goal since his first appearance. He wanted to escape the Central Finite Curve. To do that, he needed information from Rick C-137's brain. He framed Rick back in Season 1, scanned his mind, and learned the schematics for the Citadel. Years later, after getting elected as president of the Citadel, Evil Morty put his plan into action. He invited Rick C-137 and Morty to dinner and explained what he was going to do. Evil Morty told them about the Central Finite Curve. He said that Rick's built a wall around infinity. They separated all the infinite universes from all the infinite universes where Rick is the smartest man in the universe. Every version of Rick and every version of Morty has spent every version of all their lives in one infinite crib, built around an infinite baby. Evil Morty said he was leaving that crib, and that was what made him evil in Rick's eyes, being sick of Rick. If anyone has ever been sick of Rick, they have been evil too. The Central Finite Curve is a barrier that divides the multiverse. On one side are all the universes where Rick Sanchez is the smartest living being. On the other side are all the universes where he is not. Ricks used advanced portal gun technology to create this barrier. They built a massive machine underneath the Citadel designed to lock out travel to or from any universe where Rick was not the dominant life form. The portal guns that Ricks use only work within the Central Finite Curve. They open green portals that connect to dimensions inside the barrier, but they cannot reach the universes on the other side, the places where Rick might not be the smartest, where someone else might be more capable, or where Rick does not exist at all. Rick C-137 helped create the Central Finite Curve. After years of hunting for Rick Prime and killing countless alternate Ricks, Rick C-137 grew tired. Other Ricks banded together to stop him, and eventually, Rick C-137 signed a peace treaty. The Ricks built the Citadel as a sanctuary, a place where all versions of Rick and Morty could live together. But they went further. Rick C-137 and the early members of what would become the Council of Ricks decided to wall off the section of the multiverse where they were always on top. They created the central finite curve to guarantee that no Rick would ever have to face a reality where he was not the most powerful, the most intelligent, or the most important person alive. The curve does not just lock Ricks inside, it locks everyone inside. Mortys, Beths, Jerrys, Summers, and every alien species they encounter exist within the central finite curve, unaware that they are trapped. To them, Rick is simply the smartest man in the universe, because that is all they have ever known. They have never seen a reality where someone else is smarter, where Rick does not exist, or where Rick is just an ordinary person. The curve ensures that Rick's dominance is the only truth anyone inside can experience. Evil Morty described the situation perfectly. He said that Rick's trapped everyone in an infinite crib built around an infinite baby. The baby is Rick. The crib is the central finite curve. And every Morty, every member of every Smith family, every person Rick has ever met within the curve has been living inside a constructed reality designed to make Rick feel superior. The infinite multiverse that Rick talks about is not truly infinite. It is a curated selection, a safe space where Rick never has to face his own insignificance. The creation of the central finite curve was kept secret. Mortys were never told about it. Even most of the Ricks at the Citadel did not fully understand what had been done. Only Rick C-137 and the founding members of the Council knew the complete truth. Rick C-137 kept the existence of the curve a secret from Morty, from his family, and from everyone he traveled with. He let them believe they were exploring infinite possibilities when they were really just moving through a limited cage. Evil Morty learned about the central finite curve and decided he had to escape. He became president of the Citadel, not because he wanted power, but because he needed access to the Citadel's dimensional drive. The dimensional drive was the key to breaking through the curve. Evil Morty overcharged the device, using the bodies of thousands of Ricks and Mortys as fuel. He turned the entire Citadel into a massive portal gun, then he fired it at the barrier. The dimensional drive punched a hole in the central finite curve. Evil Morty opened a portal, but it was not green like the portals Ricks use. It was yellow. The color difference showed that this portal led somewhere the green portals could never reach. Evil Morty stepped through the yellow portal and escaped into the wider multiverse, the true infinite reality beyond the curve. The Citadel was destroyed. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys died, and for the first time in the history of the show, someone broke free of the cage Ricks built around themselves. Morty was horrified. He asked Evil Morty what he was going to do about the fact that Ricks exploit Mortys, that they breed them and use them as tools. Evil Morty answered with 2 words, jack shit. He said he was leaving. He did not want to fix the system. He did not want to save anyone. He just wanted out, and he got out. The destruction of the central finite curve should have been a major turning point for the show. Evil Morty created a breach in the barrier, opening access to universes that had been sealed off for decades. But in the Season 6 episode, Jurassic Mort, the breach was fixed. A race of hyper-intelligent dinosaurs used their technology to repair the hole in the curve. Rick was annoyed because he thought the breach could have been used as a story arc for the rest of the season. But the dinosaurs sealed it, and the central finite curve was restored. The cage was rebuilt. Later, in the Season 7 episode Unmortricken, Rick used a technique he described as basically fracking the central finite curve. He was searching for Rick Prime, and he destabilized the curve to flush him out. The shockwaves from Rick's actions reached beyond the curve and disturbed Evil Morty's refuge. Evil Morty returned, angry that Rick's interference was affecting the life he had built outside the barrier. He helped Rick find and defeat Rick Prime, then took the plans for a device called the Omega device and left again. He warned Rick to leave him alone or he would use the device to end what he called the Rick experiment. The central finite curve reveals something fundamental about Rick and the show itself. Rick talks about infinite possibilities and infinite universes, but he chooses to limit himself. He could explore the entire multiverse, but instead, He stays inside a bubble where he is guaranteed to be the best. The curve is a monument to Rick's insecurity, his need to always be the smartest, and his refusal to face any reality where he might not matter. The curve also explains why Mortys are treated the way they are. Mortys are bred and mass-produced to serve Ricks. They are shipped to Ricks, who need them, traded at facilities like the Citadel, and used as cloaking devices to hide Rick's brainwaves. Mortys exist within the central finite curve because Ricks need them to maintain the illusion of control. A Morty is proof that Rick has a family, a grandson, a reason to exist. But Mortys are replaceable. There are infinite versions of them within the curve, and Ricks treat them as disposable because they know another Morty is always available. Evil Morty understood this better than anyone. He saw that being a Morty meant being trapped in a cycle of abuse, exploitation, and replacement. Ricks drag Mortys on dangerous adventures, get them killed, and then move to another dimension where a new Morty is waiting. The central finite curve ensures that this cycle never ends. As long as Ricks stay inside the curve, they will always have access to more Mortys, more families, and more realities where they are in control. The creation of the central finite curve was not an accident. It was a deliberate choice. Rick C. 137 and the other founding Ricks looked at the infinite multiverse and decided they did not want to deal with the parts where they were not special. They could have accepted that infinity includes universes where they are weak, stupid, or non-existent. Instead, they built a wall to keep those realities away. They chose comfort over truth, safety over honesty, and ego over humility. Rick C. 137 helped build the Citadel and the central finite curve, but he eventually abandoned both. He grew to hate the Citadel and the Ricks who ran it, but he never destroyed the curve. He never told Morty the truth. He kept traveling within the barrier, using his portal gun to hop between dimensions where he was always the smartest, always the most important. Even after he left the Citadel, even after he rejected the Council of Ricks, Rick C. 137 still chose to stay inside the cage he helped create. The central finite curve is the physical embodiment of Rick's philosophy. He believes nothing matters, that existence is meaningless, and that the universe is cold and uncaring. But if that were true, he would not need the curve. If Rick truly believed nothing mattered, he would not care about being the smartest. The curve proves that Rick does care. He cares so much that he built a prison around infinity just to make sure he never has to face a reality where he is not special. Evil Morty's escape showed that the curve is not unbreakable. It can be destroyed. Someone with enough knowledge, enough determination, and enough power can punch through the barrier and reach the true multiverse beyond. But most Ricks will never try. They are comfortable inside the curve. They have their Mortys, their families, their adventures, and their illusion of superiority. Breaking free would mean admitting that they chose to limit themselves, that they are afraid of what lies beyond, and that their dominance is not natural but constructed. The central finite curve is a lie that Ricks told themselves and everyone around them. It is a cage disguised as infinite freedom, a barrier dressed up as exploration, and a prison that pretends to be a playground. Rick C. 137 helped build it, the Council of Ricks maintained it, and every Rick who uses a portal gun benefits from it. The infinite multiverse that Rick and Morty supposedly explores is really just a small corner of reality, a safe zone where Rick never has to grow, change, or face the possibility that he might not be as special as he thinks. And now that the truth is out, now that Morty knows about the central finite curve, the question is whether anything will change. Will Rick keep living inside the cage he built? Will he stay in a place where he is guaranteed to be the smartest? Or will he finally admit that he chose limitation over freedom? The central finite curve is still there, still standing, still separating the universes where Rick matters from the universes where he does not. And as long as it exists, Rick and everyone with him will remain trapped inside an infinite crib built around an infinite baby who refuses to grow up. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Council of Ricks, the Citadel, and their multiversal government. The Council of Ricks, the Citadel, and multiversal government. The Council of Ricks and the Citadel of Ricks represent the most organized attempt at government in the Rick and Morty multiverse. thousands of Ricks from different dimensions came together to build a massive space station where they could live safely, away from threats and governments that might try to control them. But the Citadel was never just a sanctuary. It was a political structure, a society with laws and hierarchies, and eventually, it became a prison where Mortys were treated as second-class citizens and Ricks fought each other for power. The Citadel first appeared in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, when 27 Ricks from different dimensions were murdered and their Mortys were kidnapped. The Trans-Dimensional Council of Ricks sent soldiers to arrest Rick C-137. They believed he was responsible for the killings because Rick C-137 was a loner who refused to participate in the council's affairs. The council members were biased against him from the start, calling him the malcontent and the rogue of all the Ricks in the central finite curve. Rick C-137 and Morty were taken through a portal to the Citadel, a massive structure floating in space. Inside, there were hundreds of Ricks and Mortys walking around. Morty was amazed at first, seeing so many versions of himself and his grandfather, but he quickly realized that Mortys were not treated as equals. They were commodified, treated as tools that Ricks could use and discard. The Council of Ricks ran the Citadel like a government, with laws, trials, and a military force made up of soldier Ricks. The Council accused Rick C-137 of murdering the other Ricks, and presented evidence showing that his portal gun had been used in the attacks. Rick insisted he was framed, but the council did not believe him. They sentenced him to the Machine of Unspeakable Doom, a device designed to torture and kill prisoners. Before the execution could happen, Rick and Morty escaped. They were chased by soldier Ricks through multiple dimensions, but they managed to track down the real killer. The real killer was not a Rick at all. It was a Morty. Evil Rick, the Rick who appeared to be responsible for the murders, was actually being controlled by his Morty through a device hidden under an eye patch. Evil Morty had been the mastermind all along. He had killed 27 Ricks, kidnapped their Mortys, and created a base where he tortured hundreds of Mortys to use as a cloaking device. When Rick C-137 and Morty exposed the truth, the council discovered that Evil Rick was mind-controlled. But Evil Morty destroyed his eye patch and escaped into the crowd of Mortys, and the council never identified him. Rick C-137 was cleared of the charges, but his relationship with the council remained hostile. The episode revealed that Rick C-137 had helped build the Citadel in the first place. He was one of the founding members, part of the group that created the sanctuary for Ricks and Mortys. But over time, Rick C-137 grew to hate what the Citadel had become. He abandoned it and refused to return. The Citadel was destroyed in the Season 3 premiere, The Rickshank Rickdemption. Rick C-137 infiltrated the Citadel while trying to escape from Galactic Federation prison. He body-swapped his way through multiple Ricks, killing several council members in the process. Then, he hacked into the Federation's computer systems and collapsed their currency, causing the government to fall apart. The Citadel was teleported into Federation space during the chaos, and Rick C-137 left it in ruins. The Council of Ricks was dead, and the Citadel's government was gone. But the Citadel did not stay destroyed. By the time of the Season 3 episode The Ricklantis Mix-Up, the Citadel had been rebuilt. Workers were restructuring the Foundation, commuters were going to their jobs, and a new political system was being established. The Council of Ricks was gone, replaced by a democratic election for a new president. The episode followed multiple storylines, showing what life was like inside the rebuilt Citadel. The Citadel had become a fully functional society. It was no longer just a sanctuary or a government building. It was a city, a civilization made up entirely of Ricks and Mortys. There were schools where Mortys learned how to be good sidekicks for their Ricks. There were factories where Ricks worked for low wages while their bosses made fortunes. There were police officers, news anchors, politicians, and criminals. The Citadel had its own economy, its own culture, and its own problems. One of the main storylines in the Ricklantis mix-up focused on the presidential election. A Morty, called Candidate Morty, was running for president. The news anchors, all Ricks, mocked him on television. They called him adorable and treated his campaign as a joke. They showed footage of him waving in his little Morty suit and laughed at the idea that a Morty could ever lead the Citadel. Campaign manager Morty, who worked for candidate Morty, suggested they withdraw from the race, but candidate Morty refused. He said he felt confident about the upcoming debate. The debate was a turning point. Candidate Morty stood on stage and delivered a speech that changed everything. He said the division in the Citadel was not between Ricks and Mortys. It was between the Ricks and Mortys, who liked the Citadel divided, and the rest of them. He said he saw the division everywhere. He saw it in schools where they taught Mortys that everyone was the same because they were threatened by what made each Morty unique. He saw it in the streets, where they gave guns to Mortys so they would be too busy fighting each other to fight real injustice. He saw it in factories where Ricks worked for a fraction of their bosses' salaries, even though they were identical and had the same IQ. Candidate Morty said the Citadel's problem was not homeless Mortys or outraged Ricks. The problem was the Ricks and Mortys feeding on the Citadel's death. But he had a message for them from the Ricks and Mortys keeping the Citadel alive. A message from the Ricks and Mortys who believed in the Citadel and the ones who did not. They were outnumbered. The speech resonated with the citizens of the Citadel. Ricks and Mortys, who had been ignored, exploited, and treated as disposable, suddenly saw someone speaking for them. Candidate Morty's popularity surged. Campaign manager Morty could not believe it. He had expected the campaign to fail, but now it looked like they might actually win. Then, an investigator Rick approached campaign manager Morty and gave him secret files. The files contained information about candidate Morty's true identity. Campaign manager Morty was shocked by what he read. At candidate Morty's next rally, campaign manager Morty confronted him and shot him. But candidate Morty survived. He was elected president of the Citadel, and his first act was to consolidate power. The final scenes of the Ricklantis mix-up revealed the truth. President Morty stood before a group of Ricks in the Shadow Council, a secret organization that had been controlling the Citadel behind the scenes. President Morty asked them a question. How many of them knew what he truly was? A few Ricks raised their hands, recognizing him. President Morty snapped his fingers, and the Ricks who raised their hands were immediately executed. The remaining Ricks backed down and agreed to cooperate. President Morty then began eliminating anyone who opposed him. He created new banners, changed the rules of the Citadel police force, and threw every Rick or Morty who resisted out of the airlock into space. Hundreds of bodies floated away from the Citadel, including campaign manager Morty. The files that would have exposed President Morty's identity drifted through space, lost forever. In the final shot, President Morty stood alone, looking out at the Citadel he now controlled. The camera revealed his face, and the eye patch became visible. President Morty was Evil Morty, the same Morty who had controlled Evil Rick in Season 1. He had been working toward this moment for years. He framed Rick C-137 to scan his brain, learned the schematics for the Citadel, got elected president, and seized total control. All of it was part of a plan to escape the central finite curve. The Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, showed what Evil Morty did with his power. He invited Rick C-137 and Morty to the Citadel and explained his goals. He said he wanted to leave the central finite curve to escape the infinite crib built around an infinite baby. He had been using his position as president to construct a device that could punch through the barrier. The device was called the Dimensional Drive, and it required enormous amounts of energy to function. Evil Morty used the population of the Citadel as fuel. He turned the entire structure into a massive portal gun and fired it at the central finite curve. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys died in the process, their bodies consumed to power the machine. The dimensional drive overcharged and created a massive explosion that tore a hole in the curve. Evil Morty opened a yellow portal and stepped through, escaping into the wider multiverse beyond. The Citadel was destroyed for the second time, blown apart by the very device that was supposed to protect it. Rick C-137 and Morty barely escaped the destruction. They floated through space in the ruins, surrounded by debris and the bodies of dead Ricks and Mortys. The Citadel, the sanctuary that Ricks had built to keep themselves safe, was gone. The Council of Ricks, which had ruled over thousands of dimensions, was finished. And Evil Morty, the only Morty to ever challenge the system and win, was free. The Citadel represented everything wrong with Rick's approach to the multiverse. It was built as a sanctuary, but it became a hierarchy. It was supposed to be a place where Ricks could live freely, but it turned into a society where some Ricks had power and others did not. Mortys were treated as commodities, bought and sold, trained in schools to be obedient sidekicks. The Citadel had homeless Mortys living in a ghetto called Mortytown. Morty police officers who hated other Mortys, and factories where Ricks worked in terrible conditions to produce products for richer Ricks. The Council of Ricks was supposed to govern the Citadel fairly, but they were corrupt and biased. They accused Rick C-137 without evidence, sentenced him to death without a fair trial, and ignored the suffering of Mortys because it was convenient. When the council was destroyed, a democratic election was supposed to fix the problems. But democracy on the Citadel was a joke. The Shadow Council controlled everything behind the scenes, and Evil Morty exploited the system to gain power. Evil Morty understood something that most Ricks and Mortys did not. The Citadel was not a sanctuary. It was a cage. It was part of the central finite curve, a barrier designed to keep Ricks in control. As long as the Citadel existed, Ricks would always dominate, and Mortys would always be exploited. The only way to truly escape was to destroy the Citadel and break through the curve. In the post-credits scene of the Ricklantis mix-up, Rick C-137 and Morty returned home from Atlantis. Morty asked if Rick was curious about what happened at the Citadel. Rick said he was not curious at all. He insisted that the Citadel would not have any bearing on their lives ever again. Rick was wrong. Evil Morty's rise to power and his eventual destruction of the Citadel changed everything. It revealed the truth about the central finite curve, exposed the exploitation at the heart of Rick's society, and proved that even the most powerful institutions Ricks built could be torn down. The Council of Ricks and the Citadel were supposed to represent order in the chaotic multiverse. Instead, they became symbols of everything Ricks feared admitting about themselves. They were insecure, power-hungry, and terrified of facing a reality where they were not special. They built a government to protect themselves, a city to live in, and a barrier to keep out anything that challenged their dominance. And in the end, it was a Morty, the one type of person Ricks thought they could always control, who brought it all crashing down. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, we have Evil Morty, President Morty, and the breaking of the central finite curve. Evil Morty, President Morty, and breaking the curve. Evil Morty is the most dangerous character in Rick and Morty because he understood something no other Morty figured out. The entire multiverse Rick talked about was a lie. The infinite dimensions, the endless possibilities, the freedom to travel anywhere, all of it was fake. Rick and the other founding members of the Citadel built a barrier around certain universes and trapped everyone inside. They called it the Central Finite Curve, and Evil Morty spent years planning how to escape it. Evil Morty first appeared in the Season 1 episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. He looked like any other Morty, standing in a crowd with hundreds of other Mortys who had been kidnapped. But he was different. He wore an eye patch over his left eye, and underneath that eye patch was a device that let him control another person's mind. Evil Morty was not a victim. He was the mastermind behind the entire operation. 27 Ricks from different dimensions were murdered. Their Mortys were kidnapped and taken to a hidden base. The Trans-Dimensional Council of Ricks blamed Rick C-137 because he was a loner who refused to cooperate with them. They arrested Rick C-137 and brought him to the Citadel for trial. The council presented evidence showing that Rick's portal gun had been used in the attacks. Rick insisted he was framed, but the council sentenced him to death anyway. Rick C-137 and Morty escaped from the Citadel and tracked down the real killer. They found a base filled with hundreds of tortured Mortys. The Mortys were strapped into machines that amplified their brainwaves, creating a massive cloaking field. Ricks used Mortys as cloaking devices because Morty's brainwaves canceled out Rick's genius waves, making it impossible for other Ricks to detect them. But one Morty was not enough to hide from the council. Evil Rick needed hundreds of them, all suffering, all broadcasting their brainwaves at once. Rick C-137 discovered that Evil Rick was not acting on his own. Evil Rick was being mind-controlled through a device implanted in his brain. The person controlling him was his Morty. Evil Morty had killed 27 Ricks, kidnapped their Mortys, and tortured hundreds of others to build his cloaking base. He had done all of this to frame Rick C-137 and get close to him. When Rick C-137 exposed the truth, Evil Morty destroyed the eye patch and blended back into the crowd of rescued Mortys. The council never identified him. As far as they were concerned, the case was closed. But evil Morty had accomplished his goal. He had scanned Rick C-137's brain while framing him. The scan gave evil Morty access to information about the Citadel's structure, its technology, and its secrets. Evil Morty learned about the central finite curve. The central finite curve was mentioned for the first time in that episode. A council member told Rick C-137 that of all the Ricks in the central finite curve, he was the malcontent and the rogue. The line seemed unimportant at the time. Nobody understood what the central finite curve was or why it mattered. But evil Morty knew, and he started planning his escape. Years passed. The Citadel was destroyed when Rick C-137 killed the Council of Ricks in the Season 3 premiere. But the Citadel was rebuilt, and a new government was established. By the time of the Season 3 episode, The Ricklantis Mix-Up, the Citadel had become a fully functional society. There were schools, factories, police, and politicians. And there was a presidential election. A Morty called Candidate Morty was running for president. The news anchors mocked him. They showed footage of him in his little Morty suit and called him adorable. They treated his campaign as a joke. Campaign manager Morty, who worked for Candidate Morty, suggested they withdraw from the race. But Candidate Morty refused. He said he felt confident about the upcoming debate. The debate changed everything. Candidate Morty stood on stage and delivered a speech that resonated with every Rick and Morty in the Citadel. He said the division in the Citadel was not between Ricks and Mortys. It was between the Ricks and Mortys, who liked the Citadel divided, and the rest of them. He said he saw the division everywhere. He saw it in schools where they taught Mortys that everyone was the same because they were threatened by what made each Morty unique. He saw it in streets where they gave guns to Mortys so they would be too busy fighting each other to fight real injustice. He saw it in factories where Ricks worked for a fraction of their bosses' salaries, even though they were identical and had the same IQ. Candidate Morty said the Citadel's problem was not homeless Mortys or outraged Ricks. The problem was the Ricks and Mortys feeding on the Citadel's death, but he had a message for them from the Ricks and Mortys keeping the Citadel alive. They were outnumbered. The speech was so powerful that Candidate Morty's popularity surged. The citizens of the Citadel, who had been exploited and ignored for years, finally saw someone speaking for them. Campaign manager Morty could not believe it. He had expected the campaign to fail. Then an investigator, Rick, approached campaign manager Morty and handed him secret files. The files revealed the truth about Candidate Morty's identity. Campaign manager Morty was shocked. At Candidate Morty's next rally, campaign manager Morty confronted him and shot him. But Candidate Morty survived. He was elected president of the Citadel. The final scenes of the episode revealed what President Morty did with his power. He stood before the Shadow Council, a secret group of Ricks who controlled the Citadel behind the scenes. President Morty asked them a question. How many of them knew what he truly was? A few Ricks raised their hands. President Morty snapped his fingers, and every Rick who raised their hand was immediately executed. The remaining Ricks backed down and agreed to cooperate. President Morty then began consolidating power. He created new rules for the Citadel police force. He changed the schools. He threw hundreds of Ricks and Mortys who opposed him out of the airlock into space. Bodies floated away from the Citadel, including campaign manager Morty. The files that would have exposed President Morty drifted through space, lost forever. In the final shot, President Morty stood alone, looking out at the Citadel. The camera revealed his face and the eye patch over his left eye. President Morty was evil Morty. He had been working toward this moment since Season 1. He framed Rick C-137 to scan his brain, learned the Citadel's schematics, got elected president, and seized total control. All of it was part of a plan to escape the central finite curve. The Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, showed what evil Morty did next. He invited Rick C-137 and Morty to the Citadel for dinner. Rick was suspicious, but Morty wanted to know what evil Morty was planning. During dinner, evil Morty asked Rick a question. He wanted to know how to bring down the central finite curve. Rick refused to answer. Evil Morty smiled and pressed a button. A brain-scanning device appeared from a hidden compartment in the table. Evil Morty scanned Rick's brain, extracting the information he needed. Rick protested, saying you could not scan an entire brain over appetizers. Evil Morty laughed and said most of Rick's brain got scanned a long time ago. He told Rick to check out Season 1, Episode 9. That was Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, the episode where Evil Morty framed Rick C-137. Evil Morty had been scanning Rick's brain since their first encounter. Evil Morty then explained what the central finite curve was. He said they built a wall around infinity. They separated all the infinite universes from all the infinite universes where Rick was the smartest man in the universe. Every version of them had spent every version of all their lives in one infinite crib built around an infinite baby, and Evil Morty was leaving it. That was what made him evil. Being sick of Rick. If anyone had ever been sick of Rick, they had been evil too. Evil Morty showed Rick a hologram of the central finite curve. It was a large spiral made up of yellow energy balls. Each ball represented a universe. Inside each universe, a Rick was tormenting his Morty. There was a psychopathic Rick with a knife. There was a Rick massacring people. There was a Rick surrounded by flames. There was a Rick passed out drunk on a bed. Every single universe inside the central finite curve had a Rick who was the smartest person alive, and in every single one of those universes, Morty suffered because of it. Rick tried to argue. He said he was not responsible for every messed up Rick out there. Evil Morty said they all said that. They all had that excuse. It was part of their system. None of them had to be responsible. They were all victims of themselves. Oh, it was so hard to be a genius. Couldn't they just die? Evil Morty revealed that the Citadel ran a Morty market. Rogue Ricks had used Mortys to hide themselves from the Citadel because Morty's brainwaves canceled out Rick's genius waves. When the Citadel discovered how well it worked, they turned it into a business. The Citadel bred Mortys to meet demand. Ricks could have scoured infinity for naturally occurring grandsons, but that would have taken too much time. So, the Citadel manufactured them. They forced Ricks to have children with Beths from different dimensions. They created entire assembly lines of Mortys who existed only to serve Ricks. Evil Morty told Morty that Ricks bred Mortys for forgiveness. Mortys were designed to accept Rick's abuse, to forgive him no matter what he did, and to keep coming back. Evil Morty said Morty could not help it. He was bred for it. And then Evil Morty said something that hurt Morty more than anything else. If Morty had ever been sick of Rick, he was Evil Morty too. Sooner or later, they all were on that side of the curve. Rick and Morty tried to escape through a portal, but Rick realized that when Morty refilled the portal gun at the Citadel earlier in the episode, Evil Morty had hacked the portal fluid. Their portal gun was useless. Evil Morty told them they were free to go. He said Rick was the Rickest Rick, and they would never see him again. Then Rick noticed Evil Morty was still smiling. Rick asked Morty if he refilled the portal gun at the Citadel. Morty confirmed he did. Rick realized the portal gun was compromised. Evil Morty activated his plan. He put on a cybernetic eye patch and pressed a button. The Citadel began to shake. Evil Morty had been building a device called the Dimensional Drive, a massive machine hidden underneath the Citadel. The Dimensional Drive was designed to overcharge the portal gun technology that created the central finite curve and use it to punch a hole through the barrier. The Dimensional Drive required enormous amounts of energy to function. Evil Morty used the population of the Citadel as fuel. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys were consumed by the machine, their bodies burned to power the device. The Citadel transformed into a massive portal gun. A beam fired from the top of the structure, tearing through space. A wormhole opened, growing larger and larger as the Dimensional Drive overcharged. Portal fluid erupted from the ground, sweeping away everything in its path. The Citadel was ripped apart. Ricks and Mortys screamed as they were thrown into space. Buildings collapsed. The entire structure began to break apart. Rick C-137 and Morty barely escaped, floating through the debris surrounded by the bodies of thousands of dead Ricks and Mortys. Evil Morty sat in a small spaceship, watching as the barrier broke. His thrusters turned off, and he floated in the space between universes. He pressed a button on his wrist pad, and a holographic representation of the central finite curve appeared in front of him. The hologram burst like miniature fireworks. Evil Morty had done it. He had destroyed the barrier. Evil Morty took out a portal gun. But this portal gun was different. It was golden instead of green. Rick's portal guns created green portals because they only accessed dimensions inside the central finite curve. Evil Morty's golden portal gun accessed the wider multiverse beyond the curve. Evil Morty opened a yellow portal and stepped through. The portal closed behind him. He was free. The Citadel was destroyed for the second time. The Council of Ricks was gone. The Morty Market was gone. The society that Ricks built to keep themselves safe and powerful was obliterated. And the central finite curve, the barrier that guaranteed Rick would always be the smartest man in the universe, was broken. Evil Morty was the only Morty to ever challenge the system and win. He understood that the Citadel was not a sanctuary. It was a cage. The central finite curve was not freedom. It was a prison designed to protect Rick's ego. Rick and the other founding members had looked at the infinite multiverse and decided they could not handle the possibility of universes where they were not special. So they walled off every universe where Rick was not the smartest person alive and locked themselves inside. Evil Morty refused to accept that. He saw through the lies. He recognized that Ricks used Mortys as tools, breeding them and exploiting them to maintain their dominance. He spent years planning his escape. He framed Rick C-137 to scan his brain. He infiltrated the Citadel. He got elected president. He built the dimensional drive. And he sacrificed thousands of Ricks and Mortys to power the machine that would set him free. Some people argue that Evil Morty is the villain of Rick and Morty. He killed 27 Ricks in Season 1. He tortured hundreds of Mortys to build his cloaking base. He murdered thousands when he destroyed the Citadel. But Evil Morty would say he is not evil. He is just sick of Rick. And anyone who has ever been sick of Rick is evil too. The central finite curve represented everything wrong with Rick's view of the multiverse. Rick always talked about infinite possibilities, infinite dimensions, infinite versions of everyone. But he never mentioned that he had carved out a section of the multiverse where he was always on top. He built a wall around infinity and trapped everyone inside. He created a system where Mortys existed only to serve Ricks, and he convinced himself and everyone else that this was natural, that this was just how things were. Evil Morty proved it was all a lie. There were infinite universes beyond the curve where Rick was not the smartest person alive. There were dimensions where Jerry was successful. There were realities where Beth never had children. There were universes where Rick Sanchez did not exist at all. The central finite curve was not reality. It was a carefully constructed illusion designed to protect Rick's fragile ego. In the post-credits scene of Rick Mirai Jack, Mr. Poopy Butthole reflected on Evil Morty's scheme. He wondered if there was an evil version of himself out there, but then he looked at his own life and realized he might not need one. He had made a pretty big mess of things himself. He never got his job at the university back. He started isolating himself from Amy. He stopped telling her how he felt because he wanted her to love who she thought he was, not who he felt himself becoming. He wondered how horrified the people we love would be if they found out who we truly are. So we dig ourselves deeper into our lies every day, ultimately hurting the only people brave enough to love us. Evil Morty destroyed the central finite curve and escaped into the wider multiverse. He left behind the ruins of the Citadel, thousands of dead Ricks and Mortys, and a hole in the barrier that had defined reality for everyone inside it. Rick C-137 and Morty were left stranded with no way home, their portal gun useless. The multiverse would never be the same. And somewhere beyond the curve, in a universe where Ricks no longer dominated, Evil Morty was finally free. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Rick Prime, the true architect of Rick's trauma. Rick Prime, the true architect of Rick's trauma. Rick Prime is the reason Rick C-137 became who he is. Before Rick Prime entered his life, Rick C-137 was a different person. He lived in Dimension C-137 with his wife Diane and his daughter Beth. He worked in his garage, inventing things, spending time with his family. He was happy. Rick Prime destroyed all of that in a single moment. And everything Rick C-137 did after that moment, every person he killed, every dimension he traveled to, every choice he made, was because of Rick Prime. Rick Prime was the first Rick to invent portal travel. He discovered how to move between dimensions, how to access infinite universes, how to become a god. And once he achieved that power, he decided to share it. He traveled to other dimensions and visited other versions of himself. He offered them the portal gun formula. He promised to make them infinite Ricks, gods who could go anywhere and do anything. Most Ricks accepted the offer. They took the formula, built their own portal guns, and joined Rick Prime in exploring the multiverse. But Rick C-137 refused. The memory of this moment was shown in the Season 3 premiere, The Rickshank Rickdemption. Rick C-137 was working in his garage when a portal opened. Rick Prime stepped through and made his offer. He told Rick C-137 he could show him infinite universes, infinite possibilities, infinite power. But Rick C-137 looked at his wife and daughter and said no. He told Rick Prime he wanted to stay with his family. Rick Prime called him a loser and left. Then Rick Prime dropped a bomb through the portal. The explosion killed Diane and Beth instantly. Rick C-137 survived. He ran outside and found their bodies. His wife and daughter were gone, murdered by another version of himself because he refused to abandon them. Rick Prime killed them out of spite. He killed them to prove a point. He killed them because Rick C-137 dared to choose his family over infinite power. For years, fans debated whether this memory was real. Rick C-137 told Cornelius Daniel, the Galactic Federation agent interrogating him, that the memory was totally fabricated. He said it was a fake origin story designed to trick the Brainalyzer and help him escape. But the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, confirmed the memory was real. A montage showed what happened after Diane and Beth died. Rick C-137 invented the portal gun himself. He became the only Rick besides Rick Prime to independently create portal travel technology. And then he used that technology to hunt down Rick Prime. Rick C-137 spent decades searching for Rick Prime. He traveled through infinite dimensions, killing countless alternate versions of himself, hoping one of them would be the Rick who murdered his family. He met Bird Person during this time. He fought against the Galactic Federation. He became the terrorist the government feared and the rogue other Ricks hated. Other Ricks formed the Council of Ricks to stop him. Rick C-137 helped them build the Citadel, hoping it would give him access to information about Rick Prime's location. But he never found him. Eventually, Rick C-137 gave up the active hunt, but he never stopped looking. He discovered that Rick Prime had abandoned his own family in a dimension that would later become known as the Prime Dimension. Rick Prime had a wife named Diane, a daughter named Beth, and eventually, grandchildren named Summer and Morty. He left them behind when he invented portal travel and went off to explore the multiverse. Rick C-137 moved in with Rick Prime's abandoned family, hoping that one day Rick Prime would return. If Rick Prime came back, Rick C-137 would be waiting for him. This revelation changed the entire context of the show. The family viewers had been watching since Season 1 was not Rick C-137's original family. They were Rick Prime's family. Rick C-137 had been living with them, pretending to be their grandfather, using them as bait for the Rick who killed his real wife and daughter. Morty was Rick Prime's grandson. Beth was Rick Prime's daughter. And Rick C-137 had been lying to them for years. The Season 6 premiere, Solar Ricks, explored this dynamic further. Rick C-137 accidentally reset portal travelers, sending everyone back to their original dimensions. Rick returned to Dimension C-137, Morty returned to the Prime Dimension, and Jerry returned to his original dimension from the Jerry-Bory mix-up in Season 2. While in Dimension C-137, Rick spoke to D-I-A-N-E, an artificial intelligence he had created using his dead wife's voice to haunt him. D-I-A-N-E reminded Rick that if he was sent back to his original dimension, Rick Prime would have been sent back to his original dimension too. Rick realized Rick Prime was trapped in the Prime Dimension, unable to leave because of the portal gun reset. Rick traveled there and found Rick Prime's hidden base. Rick Prime appeared on pre-recorded hologram screens, taunting Rick C-137. He said he was not there, or maybe he was. There was a naked Rick in a glass container. Rick Prime said it might be a clone, or it might be him, like a Saw thing. He was very sneaky. Then killer drones appeared and attacked. Rick C-137 fought them off, but Rick Prime escaped. In the post-credits scene of Solar Ricks, Rick Prime encountered Jerry Prime, the Jerry from the Cronenberg dimension who had survived after Beth and Summer died. Jerry Prime attacked Rick Prime with a knife. He slashed Rick Prime's throat, but Rick Prime laughed. He complimented Jerry on arcing out and called him a badass. Then Rick Prime killed Jerry Prime. The scene confirmed that the naked Rick in the container was actually Rick Prime, not a clone. Rick Prime had been mocking Rick C-137 the entire time. Between Solarix and the Season 7 episode Unmortrican, Rick C-137 dedicated himself to hunting Rick Prime again. He salvaged technology from Rick Prime's hideout and used it to locate every decoy Rick Prime had planted across the multiverse. Rick and Morty spent multiple episodes teleporting these decoys to one location and killing them. They were searching for the real Rick Prime. Unmortrican opened with a flashback showing Evil Morty's origin. Evil Morty and his Rick were returning from an adventure. They were arguing. Morty was angry at Rick for constantly mistreating him. Rick told Morty that if he did not like it, he could quit. So, Evil Morty got his Rick drunk, created a mind control eye patch, and took control of him. That was how Evil Morty was born. The flashback then showed Evil Morty's journey through the events of close Rick counters of the Rick kind, the Ricklantis mix-up, and Rick Murray Jack. After escaping the central finite curve, Evil Morty settled in a personal refuge beyond the curve, living peacefully alone. But Rick C-137's hunt for Rick Prime disrupted Evil Morty's peace. Rick was fracking the central finite curve, using massive amounts of energy to scan every dimension for Rick Prime. The shockwaves reached Evil Morty's refuge beyond the curve. Evil Morty was forced to return. He opened a portal and confronted Rick C-137 and Morty. He complained that their hunt for Rick Prime was disturbing his retirement. Evil Morty suggested adjusting the scanner ray to filter for probability stasis. This would narrow down the search and find Rick Prime faster. Rick followed Evil Morty's advice. The scanner found a Rick Prime signature that seemed different from the decoys. Rick suspected a trap. Evil Morty suggested Rick was just disappointed that he needed someone else's help, especially Evil Morty's help. Morty got tired of their argument and tried to kill the captured Rick Prime. But it was a trap. The Rick Prime decoy activated, releasing black portal fluid that pulled Rick C-137, Morty, and Evil Morty into a prison. The prison was filled with other Ricks who had been hunting Rick Prime. A pre-recorded hologram of Rick Prime appeared. He explained what he had done. After he killed Diane in Rick C-137's dimension, he realized that other Ricks would come after him. So he created a weapon. He called it the weapon too cool for a name. Other Ricks called it the Omega device. The Omega device could erase someone from every dimension across infinity. It did not just kill one version of a person, it erased every version of that person from existence, across all realities, and interfered with people's memories of them. Rick Prime used the Omega device on Diane. He erased her from every dimension. That was why no other Rick in the multiverse had a Diane. That was why Rick C-137 could never find another Diane to replace the one he lost. Rick Prime had made sure Diane was gone everywhere. Rick Prime's hologram then offered the captured Ricks a deal. He said he would give one of them their Diane back. All they had to do was fight each other to the death. The last Rick standing would win. Rick C-137 told the other Ricks it was a lie. Rick Prime could not bring Diane back. The Omega device erased her from existence, but the other Ricks did not listen. They were desperate. They started killing each other. Rick C-137 and Evil Morty worked together to survive. They killed the other Ricks one by one until Rick C-137 was the only one left. Then Rick Prime's promise was revealed. A bomb shaped like Diane dropped into the prison. It had Diane's face and personality. Diane told Rick she would be with him until death. Rick Prime's hologram said Rick should get to the death part fast because the prison was about to reset. Rick C-137 and Evil Morty destroyed the Diane bomb before it could explode. The prison began to reset, filling with fire. Rick C-137 and Evil Morty combined their knowledge and escaped using the black portal fluid from the trap. They used the fluid to finally track down Rick Prime's real location. Rick C-137 told Morty and Evil Morty to stay behind. He wanted to kill Rick Prime alone, but Evil Morty warned Morty that letting Rick kill Rick Prime without them would not end well for Rick emotionally. Morty decided to follow. Evil Morty came too, saying he was not good Morty and he did not care what they did. They found Rick Prime in his base. Rick Prime was waiting for them. He called Rick C-137 the wife guy and dead wife Rick. He said he did not know when to quit. Rick Prime said he missed when it was just the two of them, the only two Ricks who actually invented portal travel. Then, Rick Prime threatened to use the Omega device to erase everyone Rick C-137 loved. He said he would erase them one by one. Rick, Beth, Summer, Jerry, everyone. He would start small. He activated the Omega device and aimed it at Slow Mobius, a character from an earlier episode. Slow Mobius was erased from existence instantly. Rick C-137 attacked. A fight broke out. Rick C-137, Morty, and Evil Morty fought Rick Prime together. Rick Prime was stronger than them. He ripped off Rick C-137's leg and beat him with it. Rick C-137 ripped off Rick Prime's arm and beat him with it. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Rick Prime was winning. Then Evil Morty revealed his plan. He had swapped places with Morty during the fight. Rick Prime thought he was talking to Morty, but it was actually Evil Morty. Evil Morty activated a device that paralyzed Rick Prime. Rick Prime could not move. Evil Morty walked over to the Omega device and downloaded the schematics. He stole the plans for the weapon. Then, Evil Morty destroyed the Omega device so no one else could use it. Evil Morty revived Rick C-137 and told him Rick Prime was his. Rick C-137 walked over to Rick Prime, who was still paralyzed. Rick Prime was defiant. He laughed and mocked Rick C-137. He said Rick was welcome. He said he made Rick. He showed Rick infinity. And what did Rick do with it? He hung out with Rick Prime's grandson. He raised echoes of Rick Prime's daughter. Rick Prime asked what Rick's life was without him. Rick C-137 did not answer. He started punching Rick Prime, over and over, harder and harder. Rick Prime kept taunting him, kept laughing, kept mocking, but Rick C-137 did not stop. He punched Rick Prime until his face was destroyed. He punched him until he was dead. Rick Prime's last words were asking what Rick's life was without him, and then Rick Prime was gone. Rick C-137 stood over Rick Prime's body, covered in blood. The song, Look On Down From the Bridge, by Mazzy Star played, the same song that played at the end of Rick Potion No. 9. When Rick and Morty abandoned their original dimension, Rick stared at Rick Prime's corpse. He had spent decades hunting this man. He had killed countless Ricks searching for him. He had built the Citadel, created the central finite curve, and shaped the entire multiverse around his quest for revenge. And now, Rick Prime was dead. Evil Morty asked Rick if he felt better. Rick did not answer. Evil Morty said he took the Omega device plans because he did not want to use the weapon himself. If he used a weapon like that, everyone would come after him. He just wanted to be left alone. He warned Rick not to come after him. Then Evil Morty opened a yellow portal and left. Rick C-137 and Morty returned home. Rick sat in the garage, staring at nothing. Morty asked if he was okay. Rick said he did not know. He had spent his entire life chasing Rick Prime. His whole identity was built around revenge. Now that Rick Prime was dead, Rick did not know who he was anymore. He did not know what his life was without Rick Prime. In the post-credits scene, Slow Mobius's wife searched for him across the multiverse. She could not find him anywhere. She did not understand what happened. Eventually, she met someone else who lost their wife, and they formed a new family together. She moved on. She let go of her search for Slow Mobius. The scene mirrored Rick C-137's journey, showing what could happen when someone chose to move forward instead of living in the past. Rick Prime was the catalyst for everything in Rick and Morty. He invented portal travel first. He killed Rick C-137's family. He abandoned his own family. He created the Omega device and erased Diane from infinity. He forced Rick C-137 to become a killer, a terrorist, and a broken man consumed by revenge. Rick Prime shaped Rick C-137's entire existence, and in the end, Rick Prime was right. He did make Rick. He showed him infinity. And Rick C-137 spent that infinity hunting the man who destroyed his life. Rick Prime was dead, but the damage he caused would never be undone. Diane was still gone from every dimension. Rick C-137's original Beth was still dead. The Citadel was destroyed. The central finite curve was broken. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys died because of the systems Rick C-137 built while hunting Rick Prime. And Rick C-137 was left with nothing but the question Rick Prime asked him in his final moments. What was his life without Rick Prime? Rick Prime was not just a villain. He was the architect of Rick's trauma. He was the reason Rick became the smartest man in the universe, who also could not keep his family alive. He was the proof that infinite power and infinite intelligence meant nothing when the person you became was empty. Rick Prime was everything Rick C-137 feared becoming. And by the time Rick C-137 killed him, he had already become it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have portal guns, multiversal travel, and the rules of dimensional physics. The portal gun is the most important piece of technology in Rick and Morty. It allows Rick to travel between dimensions, visit infinite realities, and escape from any situation instantly. The portal gun creates green portals that connect two locations across space and time. Rick can open a portal to any dimension he wants, enter it, and arrive somewhere completely different. But the portal gun has rules. It has limitations. And after evil Morty destroyed the Citadel and broke the central finite curve, those rules changed forever. The portal gun was first introduced in the pilot episode. Rick dragged Morty out of bed in the middle of the night and took him on an adventure to Dimension 35C. They traveled through a portal to another planet where Rick needed to collect mega seeds from mega trees. Rick explained that the seeds were important, but he never explained why. They climbed the mega trees. Morty broke both his legs, and Rick disappeared through a portal to get medicine from a future dimension where technology had stopped the aging process. Rick spent too much time in that dimension getting laid because he was a celebrity there. When he returned, his portal gun had exhausted its charge. The portal gun needed some kind of fuel or energy to function, and Rick had used all of it. He told Morty they would have to go through interdimensional customs to get home. Interdimensional Customs was a public Galactic Federation portal system, like an airport for dimensional travel. Anyone could use it, but they had to go through security checks. Rick and Morty smuggled the mega seeds through customs by hiding them in Morty's rectum. They almost made it through, but a random security check caught them. The guards discovered the seeds and tried to arrest Rick. Rick was a wanted criminal. The Galactic Federation had been hunting him for years. Rick and Morty fought their way through the customs station, killing guards and innocent bystanders. Rick hacked into the portal computer and typed in the coordinates to their home dimension. They escaped through the portal and landed in the school cafeteria in front of Jessica and her friends. The pilot established several important facts about portal guns. First, they needed to be charged or fueled. Rick could not use his portal gun infinitely. Second, public portals existed that anyone could use if they went through the proper channels. Third, Rick could hack those public portals to travel to any dimension he wanted. Fourth, the portal gun required coordinates. Rick had to type in where he wanted to go. The portal gun did not work randomly. It was precise. Later episodes revealed more details about how portal guns worked. The portal gun used a special fluid called quantum transport solution, or portal fluid. The fluid was made from rare green glowing crystals that Rick bought illegally. The portal gun had a glass vial on top that held the portal fluid. When the fluid ran out, the portal gun stopped working. Rick could refill the portal gun by adding more portal fluid. Portal fluid was extremely toxic and dangerous. In large quantities, it could dissolve solid objects. Portal fluid acted like a corrosive acid that destroyed anything it touched. The fluid was also used as a weapon. In the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, evil Morty unleashed massive waves of portal fluid when he destroyed the Citadel. The fluid poured out of underground tunnels and dissolved everything in its path. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys were killed by the portal fluid flooding the Citadel. Portal fluid was restricted on the Citadel. Ricks were not allowed to make their own portal fluid without permission. This led to the creation of bootleg portal fluid, which was illegal homemade portal fluid sold on the black market. If bootleg portal fluid was made correctly, it worked the same as real portal fluid. But if the math was wrong, bootleg portal fluid had disastrous effects. In the episode, The Ricklantis Mix-Up, a Rick making bootleg portal fluid got busted by the police. He tried to use his portal gun to escape, but the portal collapsed around him. The improperly formulated portal fluid dissolved him on contact. The portal gun could do more than just create portals. It could be used as a weapon. Rick could open a portal inside someone's body, cutting them in half. If a portal opened inside a person or object, it would slice through them like a blade. The portal gun could also be used defensively. Rick could create portals to block attacks, redirect projectiles, or escape from danger. Speed did not seem to be conserved through portals. Rick could fall from a great height, open a portal at the bottom, and land safely on the other side without getting hurt. Portals had rules about what could pass through them. Only mass heavier than air could go through a portal. This meant people, objects, and solid materials could travel through portals, but light and sound sometimes behaved differently. There were scenes where characters in space could not hear each other through portals, suggesting that sound did not always travel through the portal barrier. Portals could interact with each other in dangerous ways. If a portal passed through its own other end, the two ends would violently implode into each other and disappear. This happened in the episode Forgetting Sarek Mortshul, when Morty dropped his own severed hand into a portal on someone else's hand. The portals collapsed and dragged the person's hand with them. The Season 2 premiere, A Wrinkle in Time, explored a different aspect of dimensional mechanics. Rick, Morty, and Summer had frozen time at the end of Season 1. They spent 6 months living in frozen time, doing whatever they wanted while the rest of the world was paused. When Rick unfroze time, he warned Morty and Summer that their chronological time would be unstable. They needed to let their time stabilize, or there would be problems. Morty and Summer started arguing about who was Rick's favorite. Their uncertainty created a feedback loop that split reality into two equally possible impossibilities. Time fractured, two parallel versions of reality existed simultaneously, with slightly different versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer in each one. They were not in any timeline anymore. Rick opened the garage door to reveal the house floating in a black void surrounded by Schrodinger's cats. Rick explained that uncertainty was inherently unsustainable. Eventually, everything either is or is not. They had about 4 hours to be is before they became is not and ceased to exist. Rick used a time crystal to try to mend the timelines together. He said he would press the button in both timelines at exactly the same time, and the realities would fuse back together. But Morty and Summer were still uncertain. They were standing on opposite sides of their counterparts. The fusion failed. Rick's uncertainty about his other self being a threat caused time to split again. Now, there were 4 realities. A fourth dimensional being with a testicle for a head appeared and scolded Rick for trying to fix time with just a crystal. The being gave Rick, Morty, and Summer time-stabilizing collars that fused the timelines back together. But since Rick obtained the time crystal illegally, the being said they would go to time prison for eternity. Rick told Morty and Summer to break off their collars. The chain of uncertainty split reality into dozens of timelines. They fought the fourth dimensional being and defeated it. Summer's collar transported her back to normal time. But one of the Mortys had a broken collar. The garage was falling apart, dissolving into the void. Morty fell, and Rick jumped after him. Rick gave Morty his collar, sacrificing himself. Rick accepted death. He said he was okay with this and told Morty to be good and be better than him. But then Rick saw Morty's collar floating nearby. Rick suddenly was not okay with this. He was not okay with dying. He grabbed the collar and saved himself. The collars transported Rick and Morty back to their normal time. They survived. The episode showed that dimensional travel and time manipulation had severe consequences. Uncertainty could fracture reality. Wrong decisions could split timelines. And messing with the fundamental nature of existence could destroy everything. For most of the series, Rick's portal gun worked consistently. He could travel to any dimension within the central finite curve. The green portals appeared, Rick and Morty stepped through, and they arrived wherever Rick wanted to go. But everything changed in the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack. Evil Morty invited Rick and Morty to dinner at the Citadel. Evil Morty scanned Rick's brain and learned everything he needed to know about the central finite curve. Evil Morty had been planning his escape for years. He built a device called the Dimensional Drive, a massive machine hidden underneath the Citadel. The Dimensional Drive was designed to overcharge the portal gun technology that created the central finite curve and punch a hole through the barrier. Evil Morty used thousands of Ricks and Mortys as fuel. He turned the entire Citadel into a massive portal gun and fired it at the central finite curve. The barrier shattered. A hole opened in the curve, and Evil Morty stepped through it. He opened a yellow portal, not a green one. The yellow portal led outside the central finite curve to the wider multiverse, where Ricks were not guaranteed to be the smartest beings alive. The destruction of the Citadel and the breach in the central finite curve broke portal travel. Every portal gun in the multiverse stopped working. Rick's green portals only accessed dimensions inside the central finite curve. When Evil Morty punched a hole in the curve, the system collapsed. Rick could not open portals anymore. His portal gun was useless. The Season 6 premiere, Solarix, dealt with the immediate aftermath. Rick and Morty were stranded in the remains of the Citadel, floating through space. Space Beth rescued them and brought them home. Rick tried to fix his portal gun by resetting the portal fluid. He poured portal fluid into a tray and electrified it, hoping to reboot the entire system. But the reset did not work the way Rick expected. Instead of resetting portal travel, Rick reset portal travelers. A green pulse emanated from the portal fluid and raced across the cosmos. Everyone who had ever used a portal was sent back to their original dimension. Rick was sent to Dimension C-137, his birth universe. Morty was sent to the Prime Dimension, the Cronenberg Dimension. Jerry was sent to his original dimension from the Jerry Bory mix-up in Season 2. Rick returned to Dimension C-137 and found his old house preserved exactly as it was the day Diane and Beth died. He spoke to D-I-A-N-E, the artificial intelligence he created using his dead wife's voice to haunt him. D-I-A-N-E reminded Rick that if he was sent back to his original dimension, Rick Prime would have been sent back to his original dimension too. Rick Prime was trapped just like Rick was. Rick realized this was his chance. He could finally find Rick Prime. Rick traveled to the Prime Dimension and found Rick Prime's hidden base. Rick Prime appeared on pre-recorded hologram screens, taunting Rick and claiming he might or might not be there. There was a naked Rick in a glass container. Rick Prime said it might be a clone, or it might be him. He launched killer drones to attack Rick and Morty. Rick fought them off, but Rick Prime escaped. The portal reset lasted for the entire episode. Rick, Morty, Summer, and both Beths had to work together to get everyone back home. Summer set up a navigation beacon at the remains of the Citadel. Rick used the beacon to find his way back and rescue everyone. They returned to their dimension, only to discover that Jerry from Season 2 had been taking a shower upstairs the whole time. Jerry accidentally unleashed Mr. Frundles, a parasitic creature that transformed the entire planet in 30 seconds. The family had to move to yet another replacement dimension. By the time Solarix ended, portal travel was partially restored. Rick could use his portal gun again, but the system was not stable. The central finite curve had a hole in it. Evil Morty was somewhere beyond the curve, living in the wider multiverse, and Rick spent the next season hunting for Rick Prime. The Season 7 episode Unmortricken showed the final consequences of the broken portal system. Rick was fracking the central finite curve, using massive amounts of energy to scan every dimension for Rick Prime. The shockwaves reached Evil Morty's refuge beyond the curve. Evil Morty returned and helped Rick track down Rick Prime. Together, they found him. Rick Prime revealed that he created a weapon called the Omega Device. The Omega Device could erase someone from every dimension across infinity. Rick Prime used it to erase Diane from all of existence. That was why no other Rick in the multiverse had a Diane. Rick Prime had erased her everywhere. After Rick killed Rick Prime and Evil Morty stole the Omega Device plans, Evil Morty warned Rick not to come after him. Then Evil Morty opened a yellow portal and left. His portal gun could still access the wider multiverse beyond the curve. The portal gun defined Rick's power and freedom. It allowed him to escape consequences, visit infinite realities, and live without limits. But the portal gun also trapped him. It trapped him inside the central finite curve, a barrier he helped build to guarantee he would always be the smartest person alive. When Evil Morty broke the curve, he exposed the truth. Rick's infinite multiverse was not infinite. It was a cage, and the portal gun was the key to that cage. The rules of portal travel were simple at first. Green portals connected dimensions inside the central finite curve. Yellow portals connected to dimensions outside the curve. Portal guns needed portal fluid to function. Uncertainty could fracture reality. Illegal time crystals caused problems. And messing with the fundamental structure of the multiverse had consequences. But the deeper truth was that the portal gun was never about freedom. It was about control. Rick and the other founding members of the Citadel used portal gun technology to wall off infinity. They separated all the universes where Rick was the smartest man from all the universes where he was not. They created the central finite curve and locked themselves inside it. The portal gun gave them access to infinite dimensions, but only the dimensions where they were guaranteed to be special. Evil Morty understood this. That was why he destroyed the Citadel and broke the curve. He refused to live in a cage, even if the cage looked like infinity. He built his own portal gun that opened yellow portals to the wider multiverse. He escaped into dimensions where Ricks were not dominant, where anything was possible, where the rules were different. The portal gun started as a tool for adventure. It became a weapon. Then it became a prison. And finally, it became the key to understanding what Rick and Morty was really about. It was about a man who built walls around infinity and called it freedom. It was about a system designed to protect Rick's ego. And it was about the people who refused to accept that system and fought to break free. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Interdimensional Cable, a window into infinite universes. Interdimensional Cable proved that infinite realities existed in Rick and Morty. It was not a theory or a concept. It was physical proof. Rick built a device that could receive television broadcasts from every conceivable reality across the multiverse. The shows were real, the people creating them were real, and every single one of those realities existed simultaneously, broadcasting their own version of television into the infinite void. The first Interdimensional Cable episode was 60 Minutes, which aired in Season 1. The episode opened with the Smith family watching a Bachelor-style reality show. The Bachelor chose Veronica over Cynthia. Summer was upset. Jerry was excited. Beth called it. Rick said the show was stupid and none of it mattered. Jerry challenged Rick to show them his concept of good television. Rick accepted. Rick walked over to the television and disconnected the cable box. He dropped it on the floor where it broke. Morty asked if Rick was using crystallized xanthanite, which conducts electrons across dimensions. Rick said Morty was 20% accurate as usual. Rick grabbed the remote from Morty and explained that he just upgraded their cable package with programming from every conceivable reality. Jerry asked if they would get Showtime Extreme. Rick asked if Jerry wanted Showtime Extreme in a world where man evolved from corn. The television switched to a show where two corn people were fighting. One corn person said they were not so different because they were both corn of action. The other corn person said one of them was dead corn. Rick called it boring and changed the channel. Rick flipped through channels showing television from different dimensions. There was a movie about a guy eating something disgusting who said it was delicious. There was a violent antique show where an appraiser punched a woman. There was a version of the David Letterman show where Jerry was famous. The family was amazed. Rick explained that this was infinite television from infinite universes. Morty noticed that television from other dimensions had a somewhat looser feel to it. Rick agreed, saying it had an almost improvisational tone. This was a meta-reference to how the interdimensional cable segments were created. The voice actors improvised all the dialogue for the television shows. They made up the commercials, the movie trailers, the game shows, and the sketches on the spot. Nothing was scripted. The improvisational nature of the segments made Interdimensional Cable feel random, chaotic, and genuinely alien. Rick and Morty watched a commercial for a store called Real Fake Doors. A man stood in a showroom filled with doors. He opened doors that would not actually open. He said they had fake doors like you would not believe. The doors filled a whole room. None of them opened. The commercial kept going even after it seemed like it should have ended. The man made himself a sandwich and kept talking about fake doors. Rick got bored and changed the channel. They watched a crime show called Quick Mystery, where criminals immediately confessed and were sentenced within seconds. A killer said he did it, showed the knife with his fingerprints, and was sentenced to life in prison. Another person said their mother was dead and they killed her. They were sentenced to murder. A third killer said they were the killer and put a gun to their mouth. The camera panned to reveal the Quick Mystery host, and a gunshot was heard off-screen. The show moved on to the next mystery. Rick gave Morty a pair of interdimensional goggles. The goggles scanned retinas and let people view parallel timelines through genetically matching versions of their eyes. Morty said he did not care about himself enough to look at his alternate selves. Rick said he was proud of Morty. Rick and Morty continued watching interdimensional television together. Meanwhile, Jerry, Beth, and Summer went into the kitchen and took turns using the goggles. Jerry saw himself snorting piles of cocaine with Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp told Jerry he was his best friend and he loved doing cocaine with him. Beth saw herself as a surgeon operating on a person instead of a horse. She was finally a real surgeon. Summer had trouble finding any realities where she existed. Most of the realities she looked at showed nothing. The few where she existed were exactly the same as her current life. The family was just playing Yahtzee. Summer asked why she barely existed in other realities. Jerry and Beth were uncomfortable. Summer realized something was wrong. Jerry and Beth admitted that Summer was an unplanned pregnancy. They were going to abort her. Jerry talked Beth out of it. If Summer had never been born, Jerry and Beth would have achieved their dreams. Jerry became a famous actor doing cocaine with celebrities. Beth became a successful surgeon working on people. Their lives were better in every reality where Summer did not exist. Summer was devastated. She announced she was running away. She went upstairs and started packing. Rick and Morty were still in the living room watching a commercial for a cereal called Strawberry Smiggles. The mascot was Mr. Top Hat Jones, a character similar to Lucky the Leprechaun or the Trix Rabbit. Mr. Top Hat Jones successfully ate the cereal, but then some kids held him down, cut him open, and ate the cereal right from his stomach. Morty said it was pretty hardcore for a cereal commercial. Rick said you have to pump the gas a little if you want to sell boxes of cereal. They watched a commercial for a store called Ants in My Eyes, Johnson's Electronics. The spokesman was a man in a cheap suit with ants swarming all over his eyes. He said he was Ants in My Eyes Johnson. There were so many ants in his eyes that he could not see anything. He was not 100% sure what they had in stock. He hoped their prices were not too low. He showed a refrigerator for $200 and a microwave for $100. Then he mentioned he also could not feel anything. It was a very rare disease. All his nerves did not allow for the sensation of touch. He was set on fire during the commercial but did not react because he could not feel pain. He said it was not as catchy as having ants in his eyes, so it always went off by the wayside. Rick and Morty watched a movie trailer called Two Brothers. The trailer described a story where two brothers were in a van when a meteor hit. They ran from giant cat monsters. Then a giant tornado came. Things got knocked into 12th gear. A Mexican armada showed up with weapons made from tomatoes. The narrator started laughing partway through because the whole thing was improvised and ridiculous. Rick and Morty also started laughing. The trailer promised the movie was in theaters now. Morty went upstairs to console Summer. He took her outside to the backyard and showed her two graves. Morty explained that he and Rick destroyed the world in another dimension during one of their adventures. They came to this dimension because the world was not destroyed here, and the Rick and Morty from this dimension were dead. Morty and Rick buried their dead counterparts and took their place. Morty ate breakfast every morning 20 yards away from his own rotting corpse. Morty told Summer that nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody is going to die. He suggested they watch television. Summer agreed. They went back inside. Jerry and Beth saw the alternate version of Jerry having a breakdown on television. Alternate Jerry was driving a mobility scooter on a freeway in a low-speed police chase. He drove to alternate Beth's house and told her he hated his life and regretted not continuing their relationship. Jerry and Beth realized how important they were to each other. They hugged. The family was together again. The Season 2 sequel episode was called Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate. Jerry ate ice cream from the second freezer drawer, which belonged to Rick. The ice cream was actually a pint of Cherry Garcia that contained dangerous mutant bacteria. Jerry was rushed to Street Gloopy Noop's hospital, an alien hospital in space. The family sat in the waiting room while doctors treated Jerry. Rick did not want to watch QCV, the alien version of QVC. He jury-rigged the cable box with his interdimensional crystal, upgrading it to receive television from across the multiverse again. The family started watching interdimensional cable while waiting for news about Jerry. They watched a show called Man vs. Car, where a man fought a car. The announcer asked if the car would win. The car always won because it was a car. They watched a commercial for a cereal called Eye Holes. The mascot was the Eye Holes Man, a terrifying character who appeared whenever someone ate his cereal. Rick warned Morty that if the Eye Holes Man caught you with a box of eye holes, he came bursting through a window and started kicking the garbage out of you. But the cereal was worth the risk because the eye holes melted in your mouth. Beth could not believe Rick was explaining alien cereal when they were worried about Jerry. Morty noticed a woman in the waiting room who had strange markings all over her face. Morty asked Rick if she was human or if she was like Worf from Star Trek, someone with things all over their face who was just a human in a costume. Rick said they should see what else was on television. They watched a show called How Did I Get Here? The show's premise was making people ask, "How did I get here?" A woman appeared on the show who was confused and scared. She asked how she got there and begged for help. Morty looked back at the waiting room and realized the woman who had been getting coffee was gone. She was the same woman who appeared on the television show. The woman from the waiting room had somehow been transported into the television show. The family was confused and concerned. Rick told them to stay away from the coffee machine. The show had the ability to abduct people from reality and instantly transport them into dangerous situations. They watched a movie trailer for Jan Quadrant Vincent 16. The trailer explained that in a world where there were 8 Jan Michael Vincents and 16 quadrants, there was only enough time for a Jan Michael Vincent to make it to a quadrant. He could not be at 2 quadrants at once. Jan Michael Vincents were used up. Someone on a radio said they needed a Jan Michael Vincent. An alien judge refused to sign legislation that allowed more than 8 Jan Michael Vincents to a precinct. Morty asked Rick if it was important that they knew who Jan Michael Vincent was to understand the trailer. Rick said nope. They watched a show called The Adventures of Steely. Steely was a character who stole things and assigned them point values. He stole a plumbus and said that was worth 8 rapples. He stole other items and kept track of his score. The show was simple but entertaining in its absurdity. Later, they watched a show called How They Do It, which was similar to the real show, How It's Made. The show explained how a plumbus was made. The process involved taking the dinglebop and smoothing it out with a bunch of schleem. The schleem was then repurposed for later batches. A fleeb was rubbed against it. It was important that the fleeb was rubbed because the fleeb had all the fleeb juice. A schlami showed up and rubbed it and spit on it. The plumbus was then cut, and several gizzards were pushed through, causing the plumbus to come out the other end. Everyone had a plumbus in their home. The episode explained the entire manufacturing process in detail, even though nobody watching had any idea what a plumbus actually was or what it did. They watched a show called Personal Space, hosted by a man obsessed with personal space. The host had a multi-step program for keeping personal space. Step 1 was getting personal space. Step 2 was staying away from that personal space. The host became increasingly agitated, demanding that people get out of his personal space. Eventually, the host peeled off his own skin because even his skin was invading his personal space. They watched a show called Octopus Man. A man knocked on a car window and said he was Octopus Man. He explained that he was a marine biologist who was bitten by an octopus. Now he helped people and saved people. He was a troublesome octopus person. He saw people walking on the sidewalk and said he had to save some trouble because a trouble mite was coming. Then Octopus Man pulled out a knife and stabbed random people to death for no reason. Summer complained that all interdimensional television relied on juvenile violence. Morty snapped at her, saying that maybe people who create things are not concerned with her delicate sensibilities. Maybe the species that communicate through the filter of her comfort are less evolved than the ones that just communicate. Maybe her problems are her own to deal with, and maybe the public giving a garbage about her feelings is a one-way ticket to extinction. Jerry woke up in his hospital bed. An alien doctor told him he was in an alien hospital, though to the doctor it was just a hospital. The doctor said there was another matter to discuss. Shrimply Pibbles, the galaxy's most influential civil rights leader, was fighting for his life in the emergency room. Jerry's anatomy was a perfect match for what Pibbles needed. The doctors asked if Jerry would be willing to donate his penis to save Pibbles. Jerry's penis was a perfect biological match for Pibbles' heart. Jerry hesitated. He asked to consult with Beth. The doctor agreed. Jerry was left alone in his hospital room. He looked at the medical records on the doctor's computer and discovered that Pibbles was addicted to heroin. Jerry thought he could use this information to get out of the donation. He brought Beth into the room and showed her the records. Beth was outraged that Jerry was being asked to donate his penis. But then she saw a catalog of prosthetic penises that could replace Jerry's original penis. Beth changed her mind and said Jerry should donate. Jerry tried to reveal that Pibbles was a heroin addict. A news crew was outside the hospital. Jerry announced to the galaxy that Shrimply Pibbles had a heroin addiction, but it turned out that Pibbles' species breathed heroin to live. The heroin was medically necessary. Jerry's attempt to discredit Pibbles failed. The galaxy turned against Jerry for trying to smear a civil rights hero. Donations poured in from across the galaxy. People raised enough money to buy a synthetic heart for Pibbles. Jerry was no longer needed. Jerry felt his honor was at stake. He burst into the operating room with a weapon and demanded that the doctors cut off his penis and use it to save Pibbles. The doctors told him that was not how it worked. Jerry insisted they make it work. The doctors and security guards shot Jerry 57 times. Jerry survived. The episode ended with Jerry recovering in the hospital. The final scene showed Jerry leaving the hospital and walking to his car. The Eyeholes Man appeared and attacked Jerry. The Eyeholes Man kicked Jerry repeatedly for stealing his eyeholes. The episode cut to black. Both interdimensional cable episodes proved the same fundamental truth about the Rick and Morty multiverse. Infinite realities existed. Each reality had its own version of television, its own culture, its own logic, and its own absurdities. Some realities made sense. Others were completely incomprehensible, but they were all real. They all existed simultaneously, and Rick could access all of them with a simple cable box upgrade. Interdimensional cable also revealed something important about how the multiverse worked. The infinite realities were not just copies of each other with minor differences. They were genuinely different worlds with different rules. In some realities, people evolved from corn. In some realities, television shows could abduct people from other dimensions. In some realities, cereal mascots were violently murdered by children. In some realities, a man could have ants in his eyes and a rare nerve disease that prevented him from feeling anything, and he would sell electronics anyway. The interdimensional goggles in 60 Minutes showed that infinite versions of the Smith family existed. Jerry and Beth made different choices in different realities. In some realities, they got married young and had summer. In other realities, they never stayed together and achieved their dreams. Summer existed in some realities and did not exist in others. The goggles proved that every possible version of every possible choice existed somewhere in the multiverse. But the interdimensional cable episodes also showed the limitations of the infinite multiverse concept. Just because infinite realities existed did not mean all of them mattered. Most of the television shows were nonsense. Most of the alternate realities were meaningless. The infinite multiverse was infinite noise with occasional moments of significance buried in the chaos. Morty understood this when he told Summer that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, and everybody is going to die. The infinite multiverse made everything meaningless and everything meaningful at the same time. Summer was an unplanned pregnancy in this reality. In another reality, she never existed. In another reality, she was planned. None of it mattered because all of it was true somewhere. The interdimensional cable episodes were proof that the Rick and Morty multiverse operated on a specific principle. Every possibility existed. Every version of every person made every possible choice in some reality. Television from those realities could be received and watched. People from those realities could be abducted by television shows, and Rick had access to all of it through technology he built in his garage. Interdimensional cable was a window into infinite universes. It was proof that the multiverse was real, that infinite possibilities existed, and that Rick's technology could access them. But it was also proof that infinity was overwhelming, incomprehensible, and ultimately absurd. The infinite multiverse was not organized or logical. It was chaos. And Rick had turned that chaos into entertainment. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to time splits, quantum realities, and the time police. Time splits, quantum realities, and the time police. A wrinkle in time proved that the Rick and Morty multiverse operated according to quantum mechanics. Reality could split into multiple parallel versions when people were uncertain. Timelines fractured when choices were unclear. And there were interdimensional authorities who policed illegal temporal manipulation. The episode showed that messing with time had consequences, and those consequences could destroy everything if not handled correctly. The episode opened with Rick, Morty, and Summer finishing up 6 months of living in frozen time. At the end of the season 1 finale, Rixie Business, Rick froze time so they could clean up after throwing a massive party. 6 months passed for Rick, Morty, and Summer, while 0 time passed for everyone else. They spent half a year cleaning the house, moving Beth and Jerry around like mannequins, and doing whatever they wanted while the world was paused. Summer was vacuuming Jerry with a hand vacuum. She told Morty to hurry up because Rick was about to unfreeze time. Summer criticized Morty's cleaning technique, saying he should clean from top to bottom. Morty said he had been vacuuming Beth and Jerry for 6 months, and he knew how to do it. Summer said Morty had been doing it wrong for 6 months. She pointed out there was mildew. Morty said it was not his fault. They froze time on a humid day. Summer asked Morty if he ever got scared that Rick might make her his new sidekick instead. Morty was horrified by the suggestion. Summer said she was a competent sidekick. Rick entered and told them to stop caring about whatever they were talking about. The whole point of freezing time was to stop giving a crap. He told Morty to put a shirt on Jerry and said they should get the universe rolling. Rick explained that they froze time for a pretty long time. When he unfroze it, the world's time would be fine, but their time would need a little time to stabilize. He warned Morty and Summer to just stay calm for a few minutes and they would be fine. Rick opened the front door and told Beth and Jerry to have some ice cream. He kicked a pile of unmarked bills toward them to get them out of the house quickly. Beth tried to hug Rick, Morty, and Summer, but they pulled back. Rick said it was because they missed them a lot, but actually, it was because physical contact would destroy them during the stabilization period. Beth and Jerry left for ice cream. Rick unfroze time. The world resumed. Beth and Jerry did not notice anything unusual because time had been frozen for them. Jerry's shirt was on backward, which Beth noticed. Jerry pretended he sometimes wore his shirt backward on purpose. Beth accepted this. They drove away. Rick, Morty, and Summer were left alone in the house. Their time was unstable. They needed to let it stabilize without creating any uncertainty. But Morty and Summer immediately started arguing. Summer said she was going to help Rick. Morty said he would see if Rick needed help. They started pushing each other, fighting over who would assist Rick first. The uncertainty created a feedback loop. Time split in two. 2 parallel versions of reality formed simultaneously. In one timeline, Morty stepped forward. In another timeline, Summer stepped forward. Both timelines existed at the same time. The episode showed them side by side on screen, with both versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer existing in parallel. Both versions of Rick asked what the hell happened. Both versions of Morty and Summer felt sick. Morty asked if he was himself. He thought so, but was not sure. Both Ricks told Morty and Summer not to move, not to speak, and not to think. Rick needed to check something. Rick turned on a monitor. There were 2 dots on the screen instead of 1. Rick said this never needed to be more than 1 dot. The 2 of them made them uncertain. Rick explained what happened. Their time was fractured. Morty and Summer somehow created a feedback loop of uncertainty that split their reality into 2 equally possible impossibilities. Morty suggested there were supposed to be infinite timelines. Rick said they were not in any timeline. To prove it, Rick opened the garage door. The house was floating in the middle of a black void surrounded by Schrodinger's cats. Rick used a time crystal to try to mend the timelines together. He said uncertainty was inherently unsustainable. Eventually, everything either is or is not. They had about 4 hours to be is before they became is not and ceased to exist. Rick said that since the time crystal existed in both possibilities, and since it was impossible that he did not nail this, he was probably about to press the button in both timelines at exactly the same time. Morty and Summer asked how he knew that. Rick said the answer was, he was amazing, and away they went. Rick pressed the button on the time crystal. The 2 realities began to mend. The parallel versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer started moving toward each other. But Morty and Summer were standing on opposite sides of their counterparts. Their positions interrupted the fusion. The timelines did not merge. Rick said, Huh? Rick demanded to know the reason behind Morty and Summer's uncertainty. They needed to fix this or everyone would die. Morty said Rick did not exactly make it easy. Rick made fun of Morty all the time, and now Summer was doing it too. Summer said Morty was just as mean to her because he was jealous. Both of them wanted to be Rick's favorite. They both wanted Rick all to themselves. Rick sat them down in front of a whiteboard. He gave them a speech about how little he thought of them. He said they were both young, both unsure about their place in the universe, and both wanted to be his favorite. Rick drew on the whiteboard to illustrate his point. He told them they were both equally mercurial, overly sensitive, clingy, hysterical, bird-brained homunculi. He could not tell them apart half the time because he did not go by height or age. He went by amount of pain in his butt, which made them both equal. Both Morty and Summer were clearly hurt by Rick's speech. Rick prepared to fuse the timelines again, but before pressing the button, Morty made a joke about Rick's drinking habits. This delayed that Rick by a few seconds. The two Ricks pressed their buttons out of sync. The time fusion failed for the second time. Both Ricks immediately assumed their other self was trying to kill them. Both Ricks decided it would be easier to eliminate one of the possibilities rather than fuse them back together. Rick quickly created a pistol with his time crystal and attempted to kill his other self. A shootout opened up with both Ricks across timelines trying to murder each other. The chaos resulted in time splitting a second time. Now there were 4 separate realities. 4 different versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer existed simultaneously. Morty knocked out Rick from behind to calm him down. Morty and Summer put Rick into a dog crate. Rick woke up in the crate and proved he was certain across all 4 timelines by calling himself and leaving a voicemail message. Rick's voicemail recording pretended to be him answering before revealing it was just the voicemail. Rick said, "Hey, it was Rick. He was sorry about earlier, no hard feelings," and he knew the other Rick knew he meant it too. Rick then received 3 other identical voicemails simultaneously from the other 3 versions of himself. All 4 Ricks were on the same page. They were cool now. Morty and Summer said they still would not let Rick out of the crate. Rick said fine, he would just do it himself. He easily broke out of the crate. Morty asked why Rick did not get out earlier if he could do it that whole time. Rick said he waited until he was certain it was what he wanted to do. Certainty was the key to not splitting time further. Suddenly, a 4th-dimensional being appeared. The being had a testicle for a head. The being scolded Rick for attempting to piece time together with just a crystal. The being gave Rick, Morty, and Summer time-stabilizing collars. The collars fused the 4 timelines back into a single timeline. Time was restored. But the 4th-dimensional being said there was a problem. Rick obtained the time crystal illegally. The being told them they would go to time prison for eternity. Rick did not want to go to time prison. He told Morty and Summer to break off their collars. Rick asked Morty if he wanted an ice cream or did he want to be dead. Morty said he wanted ice cream. Rick said, then break the collar. Morty and Summer broke their collars. The resulting chain of uncertainty split their realities into dozens of different timelines. Infinite versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer appeared, all existing in parallel. They fought the 4th-dimensional being together. The being attacked them, but they overwhelmed it with numbers. Eventually, they defeated it. After the fight ended, time began collapsing. The fractured timelines could not sustain themselves. Summer's collar transported her back to her proper time. She disappeared, returning to normal reality. But one of the Mortys had a broken collar. His collar did not work. The garage was falling apart, dissolving into the void piece by piece. The Morty with the broken collar fell into the spaceless void. Rick jumped after him. Rick reached Morty in the void, but Morty had dropped his collar. Morty could not return to normal time without the collar. Rick made a decision. He took off his own collar and put it on Morty. Rick saved Morty and sacrificed himself. Rick accepted death. He said he was okay with this. He told Morty to be good and to be better than him. The collar activated and transported Morty back to normal time. Rick was left falling through the void, about to cease existing. Rick was at peace with dying. Then Rick saw something. The other collar was floating nearby in the void. Rick suddenly changed his mind. He said he was not okay with this. He was not okay with dying after all. Rick grabbed the collar and saved himself. The collar transported Rick back to normal time. Rick and Morty survived. They returned to the Smith house. Beth and Jerry came home with ice cream. Beth asked if they missed them. Rick, Morty, and Summer said they missed them so much. If they hugged Beth and Jerry right now, they would destroy them. Beth and Jerry were confused but accepted this explanation. The family was safe, time was restored, everything went back to normal. But the episode showed several important truths about how time and reality worked in Rick and Morty. First, uncertainty caused timeline splits. When people were uncertain about their choices, reality fractured into multiple possibilities. Each possibility existed simultaneously until certainty was established. Morty and Summer's argument created uncertainty, which split time in two. Rick's uncertainty about his other self created more splits. Second, timeline splits were dangerous. The fractured realities could not sustain themselves indefinitely. Rick said they had about 4 hours to be is before they became is not. The timelines needed to be fused back together or everyone in them would cease to exist. The void surrounding the house represented the nothingness outside stable reality. The Schrodinger's cats represented quantum uncertainty made physical. Third, time could be manipulated with technology. Rick froze time using some device. He used a time crystal to attempt to fuse fractured timelines. The fourth dimensional being used time-stabilizing collars to restore order. Time was not fixed or immutable. It was a physical phenomenon that could be controlled, manipulated, and broken with the right technology. Fourth, there were authorities who policed time. The fourth dimensional being represented the time police or time cops. These beings enforced laws about temporal manipulation. Rick obtained his time crystal illegally, which was a crime. The punishment for temporal crimes was time prison for eternity. The time police had technology more advanced than Rick's. They could detect illegal time manipulation and punish those responsible. Fifth, Rick was willing to sacrifice himself for Morty. When Morty was about to die, Rick gave up his collar without hesitation. Rick accepted death calmly. He told Morty to be good and be better than him. For a brief moment, Rick was at peace with dying to save Morty. But when Rick saw a way to save himself, he took it. Rick's first instinct was to save Morty. His second instinct was to save himself if possible. The episode also showed the limitations of Rick's power. Rick could freeze time, but he could not control what happened when time was unfrozen. Rick could use a time crystal to attempt to fuse timelines, but he could not guarantee it would work. Rick was smart enough to know how time splits happened, but he could not prevent Morty and Summer from creating uncertainty. Rick needed help from the fourth dimensional being to restore time properly. And Rick was subject to temporal laws enforced by the time police. A Wrinkle in Time demonstrated that the multiverse was not just about different dimensions with different versions of people. It was also about quantum mechanics and probability. Reality itself could split when uncertainty existed. Multiple versions of the same people could exist simultaneously in parallel realities. Those realities were real while they lasted. The 4 Ricks who existed in parallel were all the same Rick, but they were separate individuals making separate choices. The episode showed that time in Rick and Morty followed quantum rules. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggested that every possible outcome of every decision created a new branch of reality. A Wrinkle in Time visualized this concept literally. When Morty and Summer were uncertain, reality branched. Both possibilities happened. Both timelines existed until they were fused back together or collapsed. The Schrodinger's cats surrounding the house were a direct reference to Schrodinger's cat, a famous quantum mechanics thought experiment. In the thought experiment, a cat in a box could be both alive and dead until someone observed it. The act of observation collapsed the quantum superposition into one state or the other. In A Wrinkle in Time, Rick, Morty, and Summer existed in a quantum superposition. They were in multiple states simultaneously until certainty collapsed them into one state. The fourth dimensional being represented beings that existed outside normal three-dimensional space and time. The being could see and manipulate time in ways Rick could not. The being had access to technology that could stabilize fractured timelines instantly. The being served as a temporal authority figure, enforcing laws about time manipulation across dimensions. The concept of time prison suggested there was an entire system of temporal law enforcement. Somewhere in the multiverse, there was a prison designed to hold people who violated temporal laws. The sentence for illegal time manipulation was eternity. Time crimes were taken seriously by interdimensional authorities. Rick knew about time prison, which meant he had either been there before or knew people who had. A wrinkle in time also showed that Rick's relationship with Morty was more complex than it appeared. Rick spent the entire episode insulting Morty and Summer. He told them they were equally terrible, and he could not tell them apart. But when Morty was about to die, Rick did not hesitate. Rick gave Morty his collar immediately. Rick was willing to cease existing to save Morty. Rick's actions contradicted his words. The episode demonstrated that living in frozen time for 6 months had consequences. Rick, Morty, and Summer experienced 6 months, while Beth and Jerry experienced 0 time. When time resumed, Rick, Morty, and Summer's time was unstable. They needed time to stabilize their connection to normal reality. Physical contact during stabilization would destroy them. The episode suggested that time manipulation created temporal debt that had to be paid. The void surrounding the house represented the space between timelines. It was the nothingness that existed outside stable reality. The void was where fractured timelines floated until they were resolved. Falling into the void meant ceasing to exist. The void was not death in the traditional sense. It was the absence of existence itself. The episode ended with everything back to normal. Beth and Jerry never knew what happened. Summer, Rick, and Morty returned to their regular lives. But the episode proved that reality in Rick and Morty was fragile. Uncertainty could fracture it. Time manipulation had consequences. And there were authorities watching who would punish anyone who broke temporal laws. A wrinkle in time showed that the multiverse was not just about infinite dimensions. It was about quantum mechanics, uncertainty, probability, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. Time could split when people were uncertain. Multiple realities could exist simultaneously. And Rick's power to manipulate time was limited by quantum rules and enforced by interdimensional authorities who were more powerful than him. The episode was proof that even Rick was subject to rules. He could not violate temporal laws without consequences. He could not control quantum uncertainty. He could not prevent reality from fracturing when uncertainty existed. Rick was the smartest man in the universe, but he was not smarter than the fundamental laws of physics. And when those laws were broken, the time police came to enforce them. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.